Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
The former billionaire froze in place when he saw a pram by the forest gate, and looking inside ... MP4. Kyle, a 35-year-old millionaire, packed his belongings at the mansion into a huge rucksack. He meticulously checked against the list of things he needed in the woods, which had been compiled by a hunter he knew. His movements around the house were watched in horror by his almost wife Amanda. "Kyle, calm down, you have a nervous breakdown. Have you heard of it? If all millionaires went into the woods after being dumped by their partner, the woods would have long been populated by entrepreneurs instead of trees. All the forest dwellers would hang themselves in a couple of months from such a neighborhood," she said. "Is it okay that the partner is my own twin brother? Is it okay that I trusted him more than I trusted myself?" Kyle asked. "No." "You, Amanda, what are you worried about right now? That you're going to be without a wallet in my face, or what? So I've put $1 million in your account. That's enough for you." Amanda flashed her eyes furiously. "You're a great guy, of course, creating your own business and all that. But why the hell are you insulting me? What the hell is your $1 million? I've been supporting myself since I was 18. I'm grateful for your support and gifts, but not the flat or the car you gave me. I didn't ask for it. I'm a modest girl, I know how to live within my means. And by today's standards, I make a decent living at my ad agency. Fuck you, Kyle. Go wherever you want to go, you fucking idiot. I don't care if it's in the woods or out of the woods." The girl literally jumped off the couch and grabbed a brand-name purse and began to dress. Angry tears of resentment streamed down her face. Kyle finally came to his senses, sat down on the couch and wrapped his arms around his head. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. Come to me," he said. Amanda wiped her tears, took off her shoes and sat down next to her lover. Kyle often called the girl in the ancient manner Lada my Lada, and it pleased both her and him. There was some sort of ancestral protection and magic coming from those words. "I didn't mean to offend you, it just carries me. I need to be alone for a couple of months," Kyle pronounced. "At least if I stay in town, I'll get boozy. Turkey and the Maldives aren't the best places for me to think about myself and the rightness of my being either. You realize I'm going to Maine to be a forest ranger. I do have a whole forest and technical school under my belt before university, after all," Kyle said. "I haven't forgotten. What are you going to do in forestry? Catch poachers and tame forest animals?" Amanda asked. "Why tame animals? They're more comfortable in the wild." Kyle smiled sadly and stroked Amanda's hair. "And as for poachers, well, it depends. I've already called the forestry department. I helped the head of the forestry department with money once. I asked him for 2 or 3 months as an assistant forester. Incognito, of course, no one will know anything. That in fact I am a flower king who owns almost all the flower shops in our town. And what will I do without you? And what about the wedding? I thought we were planning on applying in a month." Amanda cried again. "Amanda, but I'll be available to you. You can always call me. And about the wedding, well, we'll apply 2 months later. You'll wait for me, right? Think of it as me going on army training. You take care of the flowers and our cats." Kyle was a real cat person and had 3 cats of different breeds. "Yeah," Amanda sighed, wiped away her tears and added, "Go to your animals. What's there to do with you? Of course I'll wait for you from your poaching duties. Where can I go?" She got up and started helping Kyle pack. An hour later, the rucksack and bags were full. Kyle hailed a taxi to the airport, gave the duplicate of his house keys to Amanda, kissed the girl, and headed off to face the reflection of years gone by. Twins Kyle and Nicholas were born on 7th June 1988. Born, by the way, under the zodiacal protection of the sign of Gemini, their parents were military doctors who had undergone a baptism of fire in Afghanistan. In those years, the hospital where Natalie Brown and Winston Brown worked was located behind a high stone fence. There was a public garden in the center and an Afghan-American friendship house. There was a mess hall where they fed hot meals. Once a soldier fell from a gymnastic apparatus, having received a fracture of the sternum, a bruise of the heart, a hematoma. And another was beaten up by his grandfather for what they considered bad behavior. Natalie, can you imagine? These bastards hit him right in the heart area. Winston showed the pictures to his wife, indignantly. He worked as a surgeon. Look at the change in the entire left ventricle. You'd only be discharged after something like that. I know, Winston, they also, you know what else they do? The nurses told me. They walk up to a patient, they walk up to a sleeping patient, and they hit the heart area. It stops. Then they hit it again. Started it or didn't start it. So they find a dead soldier in the morning. The cause of death is your patient's sudden cardiac arrest, Natalie said. One of the straggling old men first raced to the canteen for compote. The one ran away 4 times, and on the 5th he refused. He started beating him viciously. Vanessa, the nurse, heard him moaning and sobbing and saved him. Look, in the Second World War, they would have just nailed the brute. But now, unfortunately, it's not World War II. In this case, her husband answered her sadly, "We will save the day." But everything is God's will, and we are not gods. Winston, come on, you're a professional. Everything will work out. What's with the pessimism? What if it's professional burnout? Then we should go home. But it's quieter. There's nothing wrong with professional burnout, Winston replied. A year after the Browns, Natalie and Winston returned home. They had twin sons. The country was already in the midst of a change of power, with all the consequences that entailed. Those who had seized power were broadcasting to the whole country that it was necessary to deepen and accelerate the processes and to engage in dialogue. And the newspapers suddenly, like ants in an anthill, were suddenly shouting that we have atrocities and the police are ruthless. The country was stagnant and the issue of special rations had to be resolved radically. Natalie's labor went well. The boys were born weighing 3 kilograms and 200 grams each and were 54 centimeters tall. Food prices were still reasonable. A 3-liter can of juice cost $1. Meat was $3 a kilo. Fish was about 70 cents a kilo. With Winston's salary of $250 and a part-time job, it was possible to live. Except Natalie wasn't very good with milk. And at that time, it was quite problematic with milk formula. So she had to go to a dairy kitchen. And soon Winston managed to find a supplier of formula for his sons. And the issue was resolved. And on 7th December, when the boys were only 6 months old, there was a terrible tragedy in Arizona. And doctors were needed there, of course. And military medics first and foremost. Arizona was hit by a catastrophic earthquake that killed at least 25,000 people. At 11:40:01 a.m. local time, a series of tremors in just half a minute nearly destroyed and caused severe damage to the cities of Prescott, Sedona, Flagstaff, and Lake Havasu City. 21 towns fell into oblivion. 1 town was left stone dead. The first plane from Washington with military field surgeons, which included Winston Brown, and medicines in the evening of 7th December flew to Arizona to Flagstaff. The next day, a team of 8 highly qualified physicians and military field surgeons headed by American Secretary of Health Travis Peterson arrived to help them. Already in the first 24 hours, military doctors provided first aid to more than 1,000 people. Have you heard? They say that during this earthquake in the zone of rupture of the Earth's crust was released energy equivalent to the explosion of 10 atomic bombs. And each one of them for a second was the same as Hiroshima, said one of the officers, sitting down for evening tea. Pour cognac in your tea, Winston said tiredly. Yes, heard something here. The head doctor of one hospital lost his whole family and all the colleagues who worked with him. He was the only one who survived. Can you imagine the condition he's in? We should help take him to Washington, the interlocutor continued, but he refuses. He says he won't stay here with his family, medical major Marcus Morris answered him. In addition to Winston, the field hospital had 5 other surgeons, 2 anesthetists, and an infectious disease specialist. Unlike the situation in Afghanistan, where the war was going on, the casualties were evenly admitted to the surgical table, but at least 60 people a day had to be operated on. Winston Brown, like his colleagues, was simply falling off his feet from fatigue. Comrades, the chief physician told them at an internal meeting, the wounded will now be brought in from everywhere. The mobile medical teams, which included students from the Washington Medical Institute, have been activated to help. The guys will be traveling through the surrounding villages, where everything is destroyed, and there is no help for people at all, and no one to provide it. So the students will search for them and transport them to us. Get ready, the workload will double. The operated and rescued people were sent to Florida, Miami, and Washington. All of the patients at the hospital where Winston worked survived, every single one of them. But here is one incredible episode Winston Brown remembered for life. He had nightmares about it for a long time. It is, on the one hand, eerie, but on the other, incredibly inspiring. From time to time, a moment of silence was declared in the dead cities in order to hear the groans of people trapped under the rubble, but still alive. Such was the case on the night of 15th December. Suddenly, doctors and rescuers heard a quiet crying of a child, apparently a very young child. They flew up to the cavity and together they removed a concrete slab that had been split in two. What they saw gave them a real shock. Next to the baby lay the dead mother. As it later became clear, the young woman was breastfeeding her son at the time of the earthquake. When the slab of the house in which they lived collapsed, the woman, by some superhuman effort, managed to hold it and make it so that between her and the slab there was a free niche into which the baby crawled. Judging from the bloody hands, she tried to save herself, but she lacked strength. The mother was unconscious, but from time to time pressed the child to herself and gave him breast. Thanks to this, the son survived. 3 months later, Winston returned home. The sons grew up and gained strength. And after 2 more years came the turbulent 90s, and life changed dramatically. Wages began to be delayed. Natalie invited her mother, Mrs. Cassandra, from the village. She really didn't want to go to the city, but she had to get the children back on their feet. And to do that, Natalie had to go to work. Grandma Cassandra, as Natalie and Winston jokingly called her, arrived with huge bags of pork, chicken, her own pickles, jams, lard, and many other tasty things. And frankly speaking, by city standards, frankly scarce. And several huge bottles of moonshine, which Mrs. Cassandra had also brought with her, were real currency. They could be exchanged for a lot of things: good shampoo, nappies for the boys, or coupons for something equally scarce. "Mum, how did you get all this stuff in here?" Natalie asked in horror as she took the bags away. "Why didn't you tell us we were coming? Winston would have met us in his car." "Yes, in a beautiful white car with a cross and a blinker," Winston said, smiling. "He got a job on the ambulance on weekends. You couldn't take a part-time job like that on weekdays. A surgeon has to get enough sleep at night. Otherwise, how can he operate? You'd get the wrong reaction from your hands." "Am I a fool to carry it myself? I hired some men at the railway station, gave them a bottle, and that was it. I gave them a piece of lard. They were happy, flapping their ears. That's it, daughter. Is your food supply bad at all?" "Like in the war?" she asked. There was a knock at the door. Winston opened it, and 2 shabby-looking men with a huge sack appeared on the doorstep. "Here are the women. We dragged your potatoes from here. They're heavy," the guests explained, wiping the sweat from their faces. "Well done. Here's your fee." And Mrs. Cassandra handed the men a bag containing the same moonshine and lard and a jar of cucumbers. "Thank you. Feel free to call if you need anything." "We live next door, in the basement," the man said with a toothless smile. "My name's Ben. If anything, this is Scott." He nodded toward his partner. "Where do you guys live?" "In the basement," Winston and Natalie interjected at the same time. "Well, yes. It's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. We got the rats and mice out, cleaned up down there. Sabrina from our office manager's office let us set up a workshop there. By the way, we can help with the plumbing." "And what in the house to attach, nail, brace something or someone?" Scott laughed childishly, switching to you with his hosts. "Fine. Just don't need to hit anyone. And that's how we'll handle it." "Thanks, men." Winston shook hands with the foreman. And satisfied, they retired to their versatile basement. Winston's family began to sort through Grandma Cassandra's supplies and gifts. The boys, meanwhile, saw an open jar of jam, and it came to an end rather quickly. "Oh my God, look at them!" Grandma splayed her hands and laughed. "Get into the bath now." "Forward march," she commanded, and led the grandchildren to wash off the currants and sweets. Gradually, things were getting better. It was necessary to live in spite of circumstances, the policy of the state and the cruel reality of existence. The hospital didn't pay for 3 months. So what was the point of Natalie going back there? So she and her neighbor Marion decided to try their hand at shuttling to fly to Turkey and buy clothes there and sell them in their own town, opening a shop. Natasha, it's a very risky endeavor. Haven't you heard that bandits stop shuttles on their way back and simply rob them? And that's the least of it. You know what they do to beautiful women. I'm not letting you in, Winston said. Comrade Medical Captain, I'm senior to you in rank, so you understand. And you and I pulled wounded men out from under fire in Afghanistan together. So don't be afraid. I still remember hand to hand. But seriously, Marion has made arrangements with reliable people. We'll pay them right away, Natalie said. Her flatmate Thomas was from the same office that employed these very same gangsters to the detriment of humanity. Thomas? Really, Winston wondered. He's a former athlete. Such promise. And parents, I remember him. What a quirk of fate. Exactly, an athlete. And where do they go after the collapse of the country? Either to the police or not to the police. It's who has more dark or light forces in his soul. Though in essence that in cops, that in bandits, they with rare exception in our law enforcement agencies work not at all defenders of people, but with accuracy to the contrary. You yourself have been on ambulance calls when sober people were stitched up after a visit. But with what will you buy the goods? I've got a bit put aside, and my mum helped. Anyway, we took out a loan against the security of her village house. And they didn't tell me anything. You and your mum. No offense, Winston. I knew how you'd react to something like that from me. You wouldn't approve. I'm sure it will work out. Natalie stroked her husband's head. A week later, she and Marion and 2 other women flew to Istanbul. There they bought a batch of t-shirts and tracksuits in bright colors, extremely popular in the turbulent 90s. Got back safe and sound with the help of Thomas, Marion's boyfriend. Opened a stall in the market and sold everything for a good profit. Paid off the loan. We had enough left over to live comfortably for a month. But then we had to go again, because Winston was being paid very little and prices were rising fast. This time we chose Canada. We got to the border by train. At the crossing, almost at the border, we were getting ready for bed, but suddenly there was shouting, swearing, and some noise coming from the corridor. Natalie, what's that noise? There didn't seem to be anyone particularly drunk in the carriage. Did there? Marion asked her friend fearfully. I don't know. I'll see, replied Nathalie, who possessed a truly officer-like poise. 5 minutes later, the door of the compartment in which they were traveling opened. On the doorstep stood 2 sturdy young men with rich muscles and unencumbered faces. Their heads clearly had only one winding in them, and that was the one that flowed smoothly into the rectum. Good night, you shuttles, one of them said with a cheeky grin. We're not from around here ourselves. Help us out any way you can. We're collecting 100 quid each. For our boss's birthday party, will you help? The women were silent. Then another man, also in good athletic shape, appeared behind the big men. He had a short haircut and was clearly in a bad mood. What are you guys doing here? Don't want to pay? We'll explain the risks. I don't want to, don't need to, Captain Natalie replied calmly. We're human beings, understandably, not the ones in the compartment. Silence hung. Marion and the brothers stared at Natalie in surprise. A second later, a man came into the compartment and turned pale. Natalie? Natalie Brown? But how? What are you doing here? That's somehow. That's how you go. So get out of here and run, he ordered. The row rose and ran on, and they disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Sit down, Captain Natalie invited, pulling from her bag a brandy, 3 shots, and an unpretentious snack. Well, here's to the meeting. She picked up a shot glass and drank the contents in a gulp. What's wrong? Dr. Smith, how did you get to be foreman? And you're the foreman? I've got that right, haven't I? That's right, her overnight guest answered her with a volley of brandy. It's a long story, and I'm running out of time at the moment, as you realize. But in a nutshell, I was blamed for the death of a patient immediately after returning to the civilian life after Afghanistan, and sent to think about my behavior for 5 years in places with bad weather, fogs, and not very nice people. And then you understand, what the hell surgery? Although I did get out on parole after 3 years. Okay, Natalie, let's not talk about the sad stuff. No one's going to charge you anything. I'm sorry about what happened. I've got to go, and he disappeared down the corridor. Having collected the tribute, the captain's crew snapped the stopcock and disappeared into the local woods. Marion looked dumbfounded at Natalie, tears streaming down her face. Then quietly she asked, "Did you fight together? Had surgery?" "Well, we fought a little," Natalie replied. "Okay, let's go to sleep." They were never touched again on this trip. They brought back the goods and sold them very successfully. It was possible to develop further, but after the meeting with Alex, which she did not tell Winston about so as not to upset him, Natalie decided that the shuttle business had to end. The money she earned was enough to open a private kindergarten. While in a rented 2-room flat, she obtained all the necessary permits, hired 2 female employees. The hospital where Winston worked was slowly coming into its own. Slowly but surely it recovered from the side effect of the change of power. 3 years later, Natalie was able to buy a small building for her first kindergarten or nursery. In another 5 years, she had a whole network, and Natalie began to receive small bonuses from the government tax cuts and the opportunity to participate in presidential grants. She won one of them and received $100,000. It was possible to develop further. Nicholas and Kyle grew up very different in character, with almost 100% external similarities. Nicholas was a bright boy, but not a very honest boy. He could get into trouble and take it out on Kyle. He never took any offense. "You're 3 minutes younger than me. What can I take from you?" he smiled. They both did well in school. They were always messing with the teachers' heads, as is common among twins. They could disguise themselves and pretend to be each other on tests and even exams. The first serious fight was over a girl. In the 11th grade, Kyle fell in love with the first school beauty, Catherine. She reciprocated him because the brothers had a bright appearance, article, and charisma. Dark-haired brunette with big brown eyes and correct facial features. Modern children grow up early, as well as enter into adult relationships. And in Kyle's case, it happened, as they say, one day. The girl's parents had gone to the dacha, and the guys drank a little more wine than they needed. True, it turned out that Catherine's Kyle is not the first. But that one has already turned 18, so to make claims he did not become. It's not like anyone's ever been with anyone else, Kyle thought, but he shared what had happened with his brother. Firstly, he trusted him, and secondly, this was Kyle's first sexual experience. Nicholas, smiling indulgently, listened to his brother's story and drew far-reaching conclusions. The following Saturday, Catherine's parents went to their garden again. Kyle had been invited to have a sleepover by 9 p.m., but the doorbell rang earlier, at 8. "Oh, what's so early?" "I haven't cooked the chicken yet. Just threw it in the oven," Catherine wondered as she opened the door and let the young man in. "Missed you very much." "I couldn't resist. I came early and the chicken will wait." He smiled and pulled the girl to him and said, "Shall we look in your room?" "Yes, let's look," and kissing the guy and putting her arms around his neck, Catherine replied. They moved to the bed. The young man started kissing his girlfriend feverishly, pulled off her transparent dressing gown and quickly undressed himself. Suddenly he noticed Catherine's frozen stare. She pulled his hands away abruptly. "Got your dressing gown on. Why, baby?" he asked. "No reason, Carlson. Pack your stuff and fly to your roof, and keep in mind, I'm telling Kyle everything, you prick jumping off the bed," Catherine barked. "What are you, out of your mind?" "Kyle who?" "It's me," marveled the young man. "Exactly. Brown you are." "All right, you're taken," Nicholas smirked, putting on jeans and socks, which was exactly what he was. "And how did you guess that?" he grinned. "It's our. None of your business, you stingy little thing. Though I will say Kyle doesn't have a mole on his right rib." "Fucking hell." "That's right," Nicholas yelled. "All right, whatever. It's worth a try, isn't it? Gorgeous. Bye, baby." "Get out." Nicholas sprinted out the door, and Catherine could still hear him laughing for a long time as he went down the stairs. An hour and a half later, Kyle came in with flowers and immediately realized something was wrong with Catherine. "Are you in trouble?" "What's wrong? Did I do something to offend you?" He crouched down in front of the girl, hugging her knees. "It's okay," she replied, and suddenly cried unexpectedly, burying her nose into Kyle's. And then she laid out everything that had happened, even though she hadn't meant to initially. That was just her way of scaring Nicholas. In fact, Catherine realized that by telling this ugly story, she would simply quarrel the brothers. In the end, they would forgive each other anyway, and she might lose Kyle's favor. And after all, his parents might find out sooner or later, too. She was only half right. Kyle was really mad at his brother. They'd even fought in the street after they'd gone a decent distance from the house. But it didn't affect the way he felt about Catherine. And they didn't tell their parents anything. For a month, there was a cold war between the brothers. But then Nicholas first came up, apologized, said that he just wanted to joke and was not going to bring it to an end. A lie, of course, but Kyle believed it. He loved his brother. Blood wasn't water. Catherine's family soon left America for Canada. Her father was a Canadian, and life in his native country in any case more comfortable than in a region where there is little sun and fruit. After graduating from high school, the Brown brothers served in the Army together. Winston made sure they got into one unit in one state in Washington. After the Army, Kyle unexpectedly for his parents and for himself, as originally planned, instead of the institute went to the forestry technical school, and Nicholas on the law school. After the technical school, Kyle went to university to study economics and graduated with honors. Despite his law degree, Kyle was unable to start his own business. Yes, by and large, it was not a necessity in life. Natalie's business was still thriving. Her chain of daycare centers was in good standing. Alex was still operating. There was nowhere to teach. Thanks to the efforts of Mr. Johnson and his girlfriend Sabrina, the military doctor training system had been destroyed at the root. Where once there had been New York and Boston, now only New York was left. The Colorado Military Medical Institute, along with one of the best military hospitals in the country, was destroyed. And what's the use that Sabrina was given 5 years of general security? High-security prisons in America do not give ladies. And Johnson got off with a ministerial suspension. It's a good thing the country's military hospitals haven't been wiped out. Military medical science has been completely destroyed. There are no clear management, military medical structures, and personnel have been lost. To recover, we will need at least 10 years, and that is, if it will be applied to this effort. Winston was horrified. The military hospital in Portland has been standing like a ghost for 13 years. Natalie, 13. I'm simply speechless. If they had put a career officer in Johnson's place and made him do what this so-called minister did, his heart would have burst. And Johnson? He's all right. Living and breathing and eating pineapples and grouse, I suppose. And we're in desperate need of military doctors. Winston, what can you do now? Natalie gently stroked her raging husband's head and reassured him. When Kyle graduated from university, he decided to open a flower shop, but not in the usual format. His parents had given him the money for the startup, and Kyle had lived up to their expectations. Here they prepared not only flower arrangements, but also toys, vegetables, fruit, and sweets, and sometimes from unexpected materials. For example, once a client ordered to create a bouquet of nails, hammer, and nuts. This was her idea to congratulate her husband, who worked at a construction site. And Kyle's company pulled it off. By the way, it was this, so to speak, flower arrangement became the best advertising campaign for his company. They made it and won the attention of the city, and then the country. Even journalists from New York came to make a report about the unusual flower salon. Kyle began to expand, and in 2 years he built his own network of such salons, calling them Talent. This was the name of the Slavic goddess of skill and talent. Nicholas worked as a lawyer in one of the offices of the city, but to be honest, he wasn't doing very well. And Kyle just needed a good lawyer in the company, because his specialist Bridget got married and went to another city. Of course, inviting his own brother to work with him in this situation was ideal. Nicholas was glad. He was tired of sitting on minimum wage and constantly asking his mother or brother for money. Kyle had given him a more than decent salary and access to all his accounts and documents. For a year they worked together, as they say, as friends. Nicholas did his best to be useful to his brother and justify his trust, but Nicholas got caught. He fell in love for the first time in his life, so much so that he lost his mind. He forgot about his conscience and his responsibility to his brother's cause. That day, as always, he was driving to work, as suddenly a girl literally threw herself under his wheels. He braked sharply and jumped out of the auto. On the road, rubbing a bruised knee, sat an absolutely heavenly creature about 25 years old, Nicholas said. Blonde hair with a touch of silver, chiseled facial features, porcelain-colored skin, and some incredible violet-colored eyes, and charming lips of perfect classic shape without the slightest hint of silicone. It was obvious that the owner of all this had never had the services of a plastic surgeon, and her beauty was natural. "What's wrong with you?" "Are you hurt?" Nicholas asked. "Why are you crossing the road so carelessly and in the wrong place?" "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. I'm not thinking straight," she replied, rising from the pavement and looking sadly at her torn tights. "So get in the car. I'll take you to the trauma center and I'll compensate you for the tights and stress," Nicholas invited, not yet realizing that he was already dead, drowned in those witches' eyes. "Oh no, I'll call a taxi," now timidly resisted the new acquaintance. And then, when she saw that her purse and coat were in the mud, she agreed, "I'm unlikely to get into a taxi like this. All right, let's go." "My name is Nicholas. What's yours?" "Sharon." "Oh, how's Sharon?" Don't be surprised, it was a peculiar obsession of my mum, who was a fan of Sharon Stone back in the day. The girl smiled. And that smile made Nicholas's stomach flutter. Not even butterflies, but a whole flock of hummingbirds. "Does that name suit you?" Nicholas asked. "I know it does. We're almost there. Turn right over there and you'll see my 9-story building right away," she said. "If you have time, I invite you to come in." Nicholas couldn't even dream of being invited to visit and was very excited. They went up to the 3rd floor, entered the flat. Nicholas immediately noticed the towel-covered mirrors. "Excuse me, did someone die in your apartment?" he asked. "Husband. A blood clot broke off, that's all. Yesterday was 9 days. I didn't have time to take the towels off the mirrors. I'll put them away now so it won't be so oppressive," said Sharon. She quickly removed the cloths from the mirror in the corridor and in the great room. "Have a seat. I'll tidy up now and come in," the hostess said. Nicholas looked round the room. Everything seemed to be clean, tidy, excellent design, quality materials and furniture. But he had a strange feeling. He couldn't even explain to himself what was wrong. This understanding would come to him much later, when he had already made a mess of things. Nicholas pushed the unnecessary thoughts away from him and, sitting on the fancy sofa, relaxed. 15 minutes later, his new acquaintance appeared. She had changed into light trousers and a tunic, but even in them her stunning figure of a film diva of the 50s was visible. A very thin waist, inviting hips and high breasts with a long, like a ballerina, neck. The hostess brought coffee and brandy. "Sharon, I'm driving. I'm not allowed," Nicholas refused. "And I remember you gave me a lift." "For me, I haven't come round from the funeral yet," she said. They got to talking. The girl asked Nicholas seemingly quite simple and meaningless questions. But in fact, in the answers to them, a careful man could draw a lot of useful information for himself. And he, being a very communicative person, and now being under hypnosis of incredible violet eyes, was talking as well as some famous TV presenter. She told almost nothing about herself, only that she had come to the city from a small village 5 years ago and immediately married a military man. When America began to confront Russia on the territory of Ukraine, her John left in the first ranks. He died recently. They did not have time to give birth to children, although they really wanted to. After the death of her husband, according to Sharon, she received a very decent compensation, so she was able to work for the time being, especially since it was difficult to find anything decent paying with her laborer's degree. They talked for about 2 hours in the morning, and it was only then that Nicholas realized that he had been lost at work for a long time. He apologized, asked his new acquaintance for her phone number, which of course she gave him, and rushed to the office. He hadn't been himself all day, which Kyle noticed right away. "Nicholas, what are you doing?" "I feel like you're in love," Kyle joked, not even realizing how close to the truth he was. "Why?" "You bet I am," and turning away, he blushed like a red-haired maiden. "What am I really?" Have I fallen in love? Oh, for fuck's sake, he thought, and immediately started dialing Sharon's phone number. Hello, the receiver was picked up immediately, as if he'd been expecting the call. Sharon. Hi, it's Nicholas. How are you? Thanks, Nicholas. I'm fine. Why are you being so formal? No, unofficial Nicholas was once again, to his surprise, embarrassed for 3 minutes like his father's youngest son. That's fine. Are you busy tonight, he asked. Did you want to take me out? Yes, it's Friday night, Nicholas replied. Can we go to a restaurant? Sit down. I know a very decent, quiet place, Nicholas suggested. And you know I don't mind. Come and pick me up at 8 p.m. Deal, Sharon replied. At exactly 8 p.m., Nicholas arrived in an expensive taxi. He rang the bell from the driveway and Sharon came out, or rather her copy from the film Basic Instinct, white tight-fitting dress above the knee and the same white jacket. Her hair was pulled back into a high updo. Holy shit, was all the taxi driver in his 50s, who remembered the cult film well. That's the girl. Nicholas was so smitten with the girl that he didn't even pull him back. He jumped out of the car and opened the door for Sharon. The one with the feline smile got into the auto. Surprisingly, there were no marks on the beauty's exposed knees from the morning fall to the pavement after the accident with Nicholas' auto. They went to the restaurant Nicholas had chosen. They had a great time there, but they had to get home. Nicholas did not dare to invite the girl to his house, despite the decent amount of drink, trying to gain courage and self-confidence. But to his surprise, Sharon decided everything for both of them. Nicholas, you've been to my house and I haven't been to yours yet, she said, looking him squarely in the eye. I really want to see your butterfly collection. What butterflies? The ones in my stomach, or am I wrong? They're not there. Really, Nicholas replied gruffly. Let's go. They didn't get enough of each other until near morning, falling asleep in each other's arms. Nicholas gently removed Sharon's slender arms from around his neck and, throwing on a dressing gown, went to the bathroom. 15 minutes later, strong coffee, ice cream, hot sandwiches, and freshly squeezed orange juice were ready. When he returned to the bedroom, the girl was no longer in bed, and the sound of water pouring could be heard from the bathroom. Soon she came out, wrapped only in one small towel, like Aphrodite. How delicious, Sharon exclaimed, gorging herself on breakfast. I tried, Nicholas replied proudly. From that moment on, they began dating. Nicholas was literally glowing with happiness. 6 months later, he proposed to Sharon. And despite the fact that after the death of her husband was not even a year, she agreed. They applied, and the day after they had to go buy Sharon a dress, Nicholas' suit, and book a restaurant. Nicholas hadn't said anything to Kyle or his parents yet. He wanted to tell them right after they went shopping and introduce them to his fiancée. They agreed to meet at Sharon's house in the morning. Nicholas came, rang the bell, but the door was opened by an unfamiliar woman of about 45. It was obvious that there were other people in the room. There were bags and suitcases on the threshold. Good morning. Who are you here to see? The woman asked. Excuse me, I'm here to see Sharon. And you're her mom. Sharon? Mom. What are you, young man? Have you been eating a lot of bleach? No, there's never been a Sharon here. This is our flat. We're back from America, where we've been living for the last 2 years. And the door slammed shut in Nicholas' face. 3 minutes later, number unknown flashed on his mobile phone. Nicholas Brown picked up the phone. Hello, fiance, came the mocking voice on the other end of the line. It's Sharon's dad, Bruce Willis, talking to you. We have your girl, in fact, she's always been ours. But a year ago, she decided to run away, and now she's getting married. No, we don't mind the prospect. But your girl costs a lot of money. You bring us 300,000 euros, you can have her. Consider it a bride price. And the speaker laughed nastily. Wait a minute. Which daddy? Who's we? What bride price? I'm going to the police now, Nicholas protested. I'm a lawyer myself, and I wouldn't advise that. Lawyer, green-eyed leaf? You go to the cops, then Sharon will stay with us forever. We'll find her another fiancé who's more agreeable and wealthy. an MP or something. Come on, don't be bored. In 3 days, we'll contact you and tell you where to bring the money. The connection was broken. Nicholas sat on a bench outside Sharon's house and then made a decision. He went up to the 3rd floor again and rang the doorbell once more. This time he was opened by a man the same age as the woman who had met Nicholas earlier. "Good afternoon. Please let me in and listen to me," he said. "Oliver, who is it?" A woman's voice rang out. "Oh my God, it's you again. I'm going to call the police now." "You don't need the police. Let me in to talk. I have to." "Well, come in," the man invited. "I just have one question. Do you know this girl?" And Nicholas held out his smartphone to them. In the frame, Sharon was smiling. "Oh my God, that's Sherry, my niece," the woman splashed her hands. "What, do you two know each other? When was the last time you saw her?" Come in. What's your name?" "Nicholas. We were getting married. Did you know her old husband?" "Who? She didn't have a husband. But she had a lot of terrible things. Sit down, Nicholas." His hosts invited him into the kitchen. Oliver took out a bottle of good vodka, and Monica, for that was his wife's name, sliced sausages. Lard took out a jar of homemade pickles. "Sherry, or Sharon, is my own sister's daughter," she began to tell me. "I've told you before, my older sister Veronica has always had a strange side. She's been seeing some shadows, counting some constellations, and having unusual and often prophetic dreams since she was a little girl. So it is quite understandable that at the age of 20 she got into a very unseemly community, and the common people called a gang. As luck would have it, her leader, or whoever he was, turned out to be a very handsome young man, and she fell head over heels in love. In fact, it was a real organized crime ring. But the leader, Terrence, he was the Star-Spangled Banner. That was his nickname. He was into astrology and otherworldly stuff too. That's how he and my Veronica got together. He told her that his supporters, and in fact his accomplices, rob only scoundrels and bribe takers. It's almost like Robin Hood. And she, if she wants to, of course she can help them. Veronica was very pretty. Sharon was just like her, Monica continued, smoking a cigarette and brushing away a tear. Yes, she was beautiful. But you listen, she suddenly switched to you. This Terrence guy talked her into becoming a decoy. He'd find rich, unmarried men through his channels, and he had them in management companies and the police. Then he'd set up a seemingly casual encounter. For example, a girl would accidentally run out onto a carriageway where there was no traffic light. The driver braked sharply, picked up the unfortunate, and walked her home. And then it was like love and all that. After that, the bride would suddenly say that she needed a large sum of money to pay off the huge debt she had incurred from loans or something else. A man who was in love, and Veronica knew how to fall in love, believe me, withdrew a large sum of money from her account. Veronica would get the money and disappear. Monica took another drink. "What, shall we continue?" Nicholas asked, setting the glass down. "We also met Sherry. Only she didn't ask me for any money herself and didn't say anything about debts." "Well, that's not surprising. Look, she realized the prick was using her when she realized she was having a baby. She told Terrence, and he said she should get an abortion cause, she didn't want kids. And that it was time she knew the truth, so he told her the truth. Veronica came to see me in shock. We lived in the country then. I told her not to even think about terminating the pregnancy. She barely carried Sharon to term. She was in labor and died in childbirth, just like that. Sherry was raised by me and my husband Oliver. God didn't give us any children of our own. Nobody touched us. Father Terrence never showed up again. When Sharon turned 18, she decided to move to the city. She went to theater school and graduated with honors. She'd already been called to the Young People's Theater. But then her father showed up out of nowhere. I don't know how he found her, but he did. And everything started all over again, Monica said. Only now Sharon was using men for money. So she was just using me too? He called me, as I realize now. Sherry's father, Terrence, this one of yours, I don't know. Nicholas told it like it is. They parted ways. But 3 days later, no one called Nicholas. It didn't happen a month later, or 2 months later he almost went mad, drinking, trying to find his Sharon. But almost a year later, he got a call on his mobile phone from an unknown number. "Nicholas, it's Sharon. I've literally got 5 minutes. Listen to me carefully. Go to the village of Sunflowers. It is 100 kilometers from one of the forests of Arizona. Take at least $100,000 with you. You'll find a real witch there. She's the only one there. The locals are afraid of her, so don't cross her. If you don't believe me, that's your right. But I can't get out without your help, and I'm not the only one. Don't you dare call this number. I'm throwing away my phone and SIM card. I'm done. I love you." Nicholas sat up for a night thinking. Then he went to his brother's office, opened the safe, and took out all the cash, about $2 million. He left a note. "I'm sorry. I'll explain everything to you. But later." He quickly packed his rucksack, bought a ticket to the nearest station to the village of Podsalnuki, and left the house. The situation was extremely tense in the district forestry office of the territorial department for one of the Arizona forestry districts. Senior Forester Walter for a long time conflicted with local residents who illegally cut down deadwood for firewood and at the same time still bribed his direct superiors, the chief forester. In addition, poachers were constantly poaching bears and wild boars for wealthy officials, even during prohibited times. According to the law, anyone could conclude a contract for firewood harvesting for their own needs with the territorial department of the Ministry of Forestry complex. And some people seem to have made contracts. Walter even found such documents from loggers caught in the act. Except that the firewood had been harvested not this month or even last month, but a quarter ago. The logging documents turned out to be old, which is already a violation and a reason for a criminal case. That is, the trees in the forest had just been cut, but they referred to the previous time. In this case, the inspector was obliged to first of all report the violation to his immediate superior, and the latter to the police, where in turn they should have issued a notice for proceedings. The subject article: illegal cutting, damage to forest plantations, or unauthorized cutting of trees and bushes in forests. But that didn't happen. Walter dragged the press into the forestry office. They created a scandal. The head of the department, with whom Kyle Brown had negotiated employment, was removed from his post. 3 other agency employees were reprimanded. "Brown, I'm Walter. Where's Michael? I'm for him. He was removed from his position, and it's my fault. But he told me to take you to him when you got here. He's living alone in the woods now. I'll start our trusty Jeep, and we'll go." They drove along the forest roads for about an hour. Then Walter stopped, and the men got out in front of a solid wooden dwelling. A fire was burning, and meat was roasting on a spit. A bearded man in a gray jumper, a la Hemingway, came out of the house. "Kyle, it's so good to see you. Come on in, darling. And you, Walter, come in too, and don't be embarrassed. Don't blame yourself. You didn't know what was what, did you? You've been working for the good of our forest and fighting for justice. Come on, men, and you're welcome. Michael, it's been a long time, as they say." "All day too," the man smiled. They entered the house. The interior arrangement was simple but functional. It had everything they needed: 3 beds, a table, a refrigerator, and a tiny television. Next to the house, Kyle was surprised to find a mobile bathhouse. Electricity was supplied by a generator, and the dog Sultan guarded it. The dog looked like royalty, shaggy, powerful, with fluffy fur. There was also paraffin and ordinary candles in the house. On one of the beds sat an old man with a waist-length beard. He looked to be about 200 years old, at least. "A tent and a dugout are not suitable for settled life," he muttered. "It is better to build a reliable winter hut. Like ours. What if a blizzard or a wild beast comes and destroys everything? Temporary dwellings should be built carefully, not in a hurry. Starting from the first spring days, or better when the forest spirit Beer wakes up. And his family too." "Michael, give me a cigarette," demanded the strange old man, and Michael held out a cigarette to him. "Here you go, Grandpa Harry. It's a real factory cigarette, rolled long ago when the factory was still in operation," Michael said, smiling. And the strange character continued the story, either to himself or to those present. It is not necessarily true that the best logs for felling are winter logs from damp trees. They're easier to handle, but harder to haul. That's what I wanted to tell you about. The prototype of a lumberjack and a philosopher in one person was broadcasting. And how to deal with it. All sorts of people can come to me now and then to argue. And not necessarily good people. Here's the thing. Hunters, fishermen, you name it. So what? Anybody. Just make sure they know who I am right away. Otherwise they'll think I'm some kind of runaway, wounded, hiding out in this clever way. Or that I'm out there catching salmon with nets and getting caviar. Or something like that. Beastly. What if they think I'm torturing someone or something? So you tell them straight away. The old man slapped his hand on the bed. That so-and-so is from Michael, and I'm working with him. The old man put out his cigarette, suddenly lay back on the bed. Sultan sniffled. Walter and Kyle goggled, staring at their grandfather. After listening to his monologue, Michael, barely containing his laughter, asked Kyle. Kyle Brown, the great American actor Charles would be envious of. Who's that? That's my father, Walter replied. He's lived in the woods all his life, knows all the secret trails, was friends with the wolves. Well, sit down already at the table, I'll bring the meat now. I've got moonshine too. We'll discuss how we'll live on. They sat down and ate meat. The generator had to be switched off. They lit a paraffin lamp for the night. Well, there's nothing I can do for you in terms of official employment, Michael said. But Walter's got you on contract as a forest assistant. That is, as his assistant. That'll do, of course. Soon they were asleep. Through his sleep, Kyle could hear Sultan barking and the quiet conversation between his mentor and Walter. What am I going to do with him? Michael, he's certainly a good guy as far as I can see, but he won't be with us long. He's got a whole other destiny, and he doesn't need to stay here. Let him help you fight the poachers, and then we'll see. Let's go to bed. And they put out the paraffin lamp. Nicholas reached the nearest station without any adventures, but when he got off the train he saw not just the absence of a modern railway station, but some semblance of it. Near the wooden building sat children and old ladies with pies and smoked fish. Nicholas approached them and asked, "Beautiful girls, how can I find a real witch doctor?" And handed each of them a $100 note. The girls were stunned. So she lives at the end of the village. Our Charles will take you there now, they replied, counting the money. Charles turned out to be a not-yet-old man of rather shabby appearance driving an old Jigalenka. It's important, he said, and $500 on top, plus a bottle of moonshine, which Nicholas sold immediately to the old ladies. He paid and got into the wreck. They drove for 2 hours over bumps. They stopped at a well-worn fence. Nicholas got out, knocked on the gate. It was opened by a woman who was not an old woman at all. "You've come. So you've done well," she said. "The cards have not lied. Come in, then." Nicholas entered the courtyard and was speechless. He saw a large log house. Somewhere inside there was a child's crying and a painfully familiar female voice. "Come on, my kittens, now I'll feed you, my darlings." Nicholas pushed the woman aside and literally flew into the house. There was no one on the ground floor. He ran up the wooden stairs to the first floor. One of the rooms was open. He entered and saw his Sharon breastfeeding one of the girls. He could tell by the pink nappies and caps. The second girl, bandaged with tiny feet, lay in a cot. Sharon turned round. "Well, our daddy's here, thank God," and set about feeding her second daughter. "Well, that's it, parents, come on, I've opened up your room and made your bed over there. Do you need to talk? And me, little ones, I'm off on my own. You fed your daughters, didn't you, Sharon?" "Sure, just a little bit, and then to bed. Elizabeth's the only one who's restless. Elizabeth, what did you name your other daughter?" Nicholas looked at his daughters' tiny faces and everything turned over inside him. "Alice and Elizabeth. Except I haven't written them down for you yet, but I'll tell you later." "It's a good thing you haven't. It's up to the father to sign his daughters in." They talked all night. Sharon said that when her father found her, she was very happy, for she didn't remember her mother at all. When Veronica got away from him, the pregnant Sharon and his whole gang were taken. And everyone in the gang got a decent sentence. My father got the longest 20 years of strict regime. He served his full sentence, And in the meantime, he'd made even more criminal connections. "How did he find you stroking Sharon's hair?" Nicholas asked. "Jesus, Nicholas, what's social media for?" I posted about myself on social media, Telegram, Facebook, and Instagram like all modern girls. Terrence went out, made inquiries. It wasn't difficult. He texted me first, sent me a photo of him and his mum young and happy. Then they met. And then we met, and he asked for help. Sherry continued. He said he'd been robbed by some official in his day. He was dead, but his son was left with an inheritance. But the money supposedly belonged to the father. And I, as the heiress, just had to invite that man to visit him in a rented flat. Their accomplice would be waiting for him there, and I'd get the money for my education and to start a business. Sharon, darling, but that's utter nonsense. How could you believe such nonsense? And wait, did you sleep with him? Nicholas got out of bed and, pushing the girl aside, lit a cigarette through the open window. "Nicholas, can you hear me all right? I told you I just got hit by the wheels of his car, invited him to visit, that's all." "What was the trick with me?" Nicholas asked coldly. The youngest by 3 minutes of his father's son did not turn to the girl. An eternity had passed for him in these few 24 hours, when he had robbed his own brother, found his one love, and gained 2 daughters at once. "Nicholas, you won't believe this, but I got under the wheels of your car completely by accident. I was waiting for Monica when she went to the US for 2 years. She left me the key to her flat. I lived there. I came in, and there was my father. All the pictures of Aunt Monica and Uncle Oliver are gone. He puts up some portrait with a black mourning stripe on it, covers up the mirrors, and says to me, 'Sherry, daughter, help me one last time.' I goggle at all this and ask, 'Why and what are you doing?' There's this fat carp named Kyle Brown. He's got a chain of businesses around town, and his dad's a thief too." "What? My dad's a thief?" "Yeah, our dad and mom fought in Afghanistan too. They're military doctors. What kind of thief is he, Nicholas?" "Calm down. For God's sake," Sherry said. "Oh, listen to me." I didn't agree, Sharon continued. I started screaming that I would no longer be involved in his affairs. I got hysterical and ran out of Aunt Monica's house and got hit by your tires. And then what happened? That was the day we met. I specifically invited you to visit. I thought if Dad showed up and I wasn't alone, he'd slow down. And he did. Yeah, they had some kind of fight. Dad got hurt in the fight. Then when we were out shopping, I came out of the house just to take out the rubbish. They picked me up under my arms and shoved me into the car and drove me to Daddy's mansion. He bluntly told me that either I would shake you out of your money or he would do it himself. I said no. And then you know the rest. Wait, but why didn't anyone call me back after 3 days as promised? I would have found the money because I started having uterine bleeding. My father had nowhere else to go. He called an ambulance, and that's where it turned out I was pregnant. He paid for my stay in an expensive clinic. I don't know why. What plans did he have for me? Why were there plans? Don't you have any now? The stroke broke him. He had a mistress working at the clinic where I was lying. Sherry's a sweet girl. She loves her father to bits. I don't know why. They've been together about 10 years. And that's our grandmother, Natalie's daughter. Sherry. It's like a soap opera. It's like a bad film, for God's sake. Maybe. But she's the one who quietly brought me here with the girls at night by herself. After she gave birth, she was very afraid her father would leave her because of us. He's the best man in the world to her. That's how it is. Where's the father now? Well, in the hospital, I guess. Where are we going? I don't understand. We can't live in the woods forever. I know, go to bed. Just a question, why did you say to take so much money with you? I was asked to, Nicholas. I didn't know how the situation would turn out. And if he started blackmailing you with the kids, what then? Amanda asked. She hadn't been able to get Kyle on the phone for a week now, but today was her lucky day. Hello, Amanda. What's wrong? Came the sleepy voice of her lover. What's wrong? You promised to always be in touch, and you're acting like an irresponsible person yourself, and she burst into tears. Quickly tell me where your forestry is, before I get all the press in town and the cops on the case. I'm pregnant, Brown. And if you think it's an immaculate conception, I'm going to greatly disappoint you in that delusion. You're pregnant. How's that? Wait, Amanda. Kyle was now starting to wake up to the powerful snoring of Walter's grandfather, right, he said. And he dictated to her the details of where their hut was located. You need to get to the woodshed first, and then they'll assign you a guide. Stop. What am I talking about? Don't fly anywhere, but there were already short beeps on the other end of the phone. Damn. I'm irresponsible, Kyle exclaimed. About 5 minutes after the call, Amanda's mobile rang again. Nicholas's number came up. It's the Catcher and the Beast. Nicholas, we're so happy to see you. Are you on holiday in the Maldives or what? Brother's stolen money run out. Amanda, the money is safe and sound. I'll explain it to you later. I need to know where Kyle and Alex are right away. Nicholas briefly told his story to Alex. He woke up and hastily washed his face and suddenly heard an infant crying. What the hell, he thought. Have I gone crazy on the fatherhood thing or something? He turned around and saw that right next to the door of the ranger's cabin was a pram for the twins, only it was pink. He walked over to it in shock and found a note that read, "Hi, Uncle Kyle. Your nieces Ellis and Anna are writing to you. Please welcome the new addition to the family." What's the joke? Kyle asked. At that time, Nicholas and Sharon appeared from the house. Meet. This is my future wife and the mother of my daughters. That is, your nieces. What's going on at this time? Grandpa Walter woke up and came out of the house rubbing his beard. There you go. I told you all sorts of people would come, Grandpa Walter remarked. I've never seen anything like this with children. Are we going to have children living in the gatehouse or what? Well, business. No, grandfather. We won't have any children living here. They'll all be gone soon, Oliver answered him. And you go, we'll make herbal tea for everyone. While the brothers were talking, they were recovering from their experiences and what they had heard from each other. 4 hours passed. A police car appeared on the forest path and Amanda jumped out. The first thing she did was walk over to the sleeping babies, and then to Kyle and Nicholas. The boys packed up their things, stowed the pram and settled into the 2 civvies, one Walters, the other from the forestry. They made it to the station without adventure, and into town too. Amanda and Kyle went to his mansion, and Nicholas and Sharon went to his flat. But as soon as they entered the house, they saw a tall, gray-haired man sitting on the couch. Hello, daughter. The man stood up, a pistol in his hands. Leave your grandchild to your future husband. I don't touch the children, but will you come with me? I need money. Quiet, quiet, Father Terence will sort this out with you now. You won't kill your own granddaughters, will you? Nicholas asked with fear for the children. The man, quickly assessing the situation, answered him. I won't. If you do what I tell you, I'll give you $2 million right now. They're in that bag. Take it. Are you a fool, son-in-law? What dollars? I need €1 million to get out of here. You don't have that kind of money, but your brother does. Bring €1 million to the airport in 24 hours. If you bring your friends with you, like in Ocean's 11, you'll end up with a crippled wife. I'm not going to kill Sherry. She's blood. But I'll cripple her, and I've got my daughter with me, so you'll think better of it. He grabbed Sherry by the scruff of the neck and dragged her towards the exit. I'm breastfeeding. What are you doing, you fiend? What kind of father are you to me? Are you a monster? Sherry screamed. Nothing, Terence replied. Feeding babies today is no problem. Your Nicholas can handle it, and you shut up, daughter. Because I've become very nervous since my stroke. I could make an ugly hole in your lovely leg or your equally lovely hand. That's gonna hurt. That's one thing. And secondly, it's not aesthetically pleasing. He dragged Sherry out the door. She could be heard crying and screaming. Then the car engine roared and everything went quiet. Nicholas sat on the sofa next to the pram, shaking. He couldn't rush out to rescue Sherry, leaving the babies behind. After calming down, he dialed his brother's number and told him everything. Half an hour later, his father and mother appeared on his doorstep, then Kyle, and with them a respectable man in civilian clothes. Clearly an officer by the looks of him, and not an easy one. Natalie and Winston went straight to the bedroom where the granddaughters were sleeping sweetly. They sat down next to the pram and looked tenderly at the tiny girls, holding each other's hands. At this time, the officer was instructing Nicholas on the proper course of action. "Nicholas, you will be led, do not fear for Sherry. We've been tracking Stargazer's movements for the last 6 months. The operation to develop the gang has been going on for even longer." "But how did he get out of his hospital bed? Didn't he have a stroke or a heart attack?" Nicholas asked. "He didn't have a stroke. He was covered for by Jennifer Small, Terrence Morgan's mistress. That's the real last name of the recidivist thief and con man of all America nicknamed Stargazer." "What do I have to do?" "We will provide you with the necessary amount of money. You will take a taxi alone, but with a bug. We don't know where he'll stop the taxi or what's in his head. SWAT has already been dispatched to the airport area. We've got machine guns in the woods. Tomorrow morning you're on your way out." At that time, Natalie came out of the bedroom. Winston was carrying his granddaughters in his arms. She walked over to her son. "Nicholas, son, everything will be fine. Trust us. Your father and I have been through worse, and as you can see, we're still alive," Natalie said. "And we raised you. Hold on, we'll take the children with us. Save your love." "Yes, Mum," Nicholas replied. Terrence dragged his daughter to the dugout he had dug in case of just such a force majeure. Sherry sat with her hands and feet bound, milk running down her t-shirt. It was time for her to feed her daughters. Stargazer hummed, walked over to her daughter and untied one arm, tossing her towels. "It's clean." "Took it for myself," he said. "Give me some water and come back," Sherry asked. The man nodded toward a young woman who was sitting on the crates with her arms around her shoulders. "Jennifer, give her some water and help her, will you? And don't shake like a sheep's tail. We'll be walking in another country soon, a normal country. First to Canada, and there we'll see." The girl took water, wiped the trickles of milk from Sherry's breasts. She let her drink. She was tired and fell back against the earthen wall. The mobile phone rang. "Stargazer, give me the address." "Nicholas, you're coming. What a clever girl. You'll be on the motorway now. Stop at the Cafe Myth. Let go of the car. You sit down at the table, order something. Someone will come to you. Jennifer, get ready. It's time for you to go." "Yes, Terrence," she suddenly dropped to her knees. "Terrence, we don't need that €1,000,000. Let your daughter go, please God. We won't get out of these woods, they'll kill us. I can feel it. We're not going to Canada. You're a grown man. Do you really think Nicholas didn't involve the police? He wouldn't risk the woman he loves, the mother of his children. He's definitely gone to the feds for help. I have about $30,000 in savings. I sold my mom's house in the country 6 months ago. Let's go, I'll take it out. I grew up here, Terrence. I don't need $1,000,000. You say 30,000, we'll get out." Terrence grinned. "You're a village idiot. He won't risk his woman. I'll go ahead, come with me. If you love me, of course." And he grinned nastily. Jennifer stood up and walked towards the cafe. Nicholas was already sitting there, trying to feign nonchalance on his face, but he wasn't doing a very good job. Jennifer sat down at his table and said, "Quiet, follow me. I will lead you to the dugout where your wife is. I'm guessing you're not alone. That's the truth. Just nod your head and signal to the policeman." Nicholas nodded. Then he smoothed his hair, but Jennifer's words were already heard by the task force. They walked towards the woods, pretending they were just going for a walk. Terrence watched from behind the trees in the dugout as Jennifer and Nicholas got quite close. SWAT team members began to appear from behind trees and piles like ninjas. "Bastard." Gave up after all, he yelled and shot the girl. He hit her in the heart with the first shot. Jennifer died instantly. Several more shots rang out in response to that shot. After sending Terrence to the dust, the prisoner was taken out of the dugout. An ambulance was on its way. The girl was placed on a stretcher. Nicholas sat beside her. A year later, everything went back to normal. The end of autumn promised snow. The New Year's rush and holidays approached. Sherry and Nicholas's girls were just starting to walk. Amanda and Kyle had just recently become parents too. They had a son, so the older Browns had 3 grandchildren at once. At first, Amanda and Kyle resented the fact that the twins, the Brown family heirs, went to the 3 minutes younger brother. But then they got quiet. Their Charles was giving them so much fun at night that when the boy was multiplied by 2, the parents might not have been able to stand it. December came. The family was preparing for New Year's Eve. Nicholas decorated the Christmas tree, stacked presents under the tree. They sat with Sherry on the floor and drank hot mulled wine. "Still, why did you call yourself Sharon and dress like Sharon Stone on your first date?" Nicholas said. "Honestly, it doesn't suit you at all. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not you." "I don't know," Sherry replied. "Aunt Monica used to tell me a lot about how I got a bit older and already realized that Mum was gone. That Mum was beautiful, like Sharon Stone," Sherry said. "So I made up a stage name for myself. I'm a theater major, after all. Promise me that all theater in our married life is over, okay? And now we'll have only real, very real life," Nicholas answered. "Promise?" "I promise. But then you promise me too that you'll live for 300 years and never leave me." "I promise." At the same time, in the distant Arizona woods, Elizabeth's grandfather was making herbal tea for Walter and his Thomas, as always, and traditionally muttering into his gray beard. A dugout is good when it's warm, but in winter a bear can get into it, or some other fierce beast. As it happens, even an inspector may come to offend a good beast, like Charles of the Woods or Sabrina the Fox. "Let me have a smoke. I can't control your demonic visions, but pour me a drink. The new year is here. I can smell it." "No, grandfather, the chimes haven't struck yet." "Wait a bit," replied Walter. "What do I need your chimes for?" "The wolves have begun to howl, and the owls hooting. Here they are congratulating you and me. The forest beast knows exactly when the new year is coming. Well, let's go, men." Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, 2 pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. "Don't go, Robert, it'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather," she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment, he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. "Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you?" "I'm starving. I'll never make it home," she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. "Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd." In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy. She just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. "Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that." Belle was taken aback. "Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her?" Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. "Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing." After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor. Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young. That was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner. Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance. Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him, and his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire. Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience. The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect? I think you misunderstood me. Robert removed her hand. I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it. The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatricians strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the four of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of two evils: go to the sea with the three of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the three of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time, a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed, and he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, two parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine-building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed. Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories? Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything. He walked home and thought wistfully, nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible. The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing. Soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the store's Jacqueline to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt, with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital, but no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us, it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards. What kind of whimsy is that? Echoed him in the tone of a confused director. Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them. The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his. There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him and sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you, he said. To what do I owe? Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria. The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure. his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance, thought the director, and said aloud, "Would you agree to help us out?" Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. "I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments." "Do not chop from the shoulder," tried to press on the pity of the director. "If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie." Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed in his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job. His professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips, and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools. except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them he was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home? Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher, who works as a choirmaster, unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later, she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten. And later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Catherine was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frightenedly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, at a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes: snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly. Can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling, Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension. So he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, Madison, do you need my help or can I go? There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that. Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place, only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over, Robert said. It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent. That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication. Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me. Because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man. Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabali in the family, he said, laughing. Then the three of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family. Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside, he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it. Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that, either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth. As long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that. But you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time, he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love for many years, came together, a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy." "I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school, disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, "Everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers." I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma: how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. "Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable," he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. "Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque," Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. "They like you," Michael said. "Who?" Jennifer didn't understand. "My parents," he explained. "They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with." She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog, then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, "Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good." There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note: "Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything." He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own: real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought, how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. "Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence?" Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. "But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon." Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. "So, together again. And now forever?" Elizabeth answered. "Yes, only like that, only together, my love." At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. "Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes?" she exclaimed. "I'm the first to taste." She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. "By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days." "What a tragedy," said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did. James walked slowly up the white, worn steps. The bank of the rocky river running through the city was high. He had to climb several flights of stairs to reach the embankment. James was shivering in his old down jacket. It was a real gray November. A piercing wind and icy grains were falling from the sky. Here by the river, the temperature was much lower than in the city. It felt like winter was approaching. James pulled his knitted hat over his ears. There was no way he was going to get sick. If he went to bed, he wouldn't be able to pay for a bed at the hostel. There'd be nothing to buy groceries with, let alone medicine, because the life of a homeless man is like a flood. What can you do? James has seen worse times. He slept on a heating duct and lived in a dumpster, surviving as best he could, but he managed to make it through, more or less get on with his life. Until the fulfillment of the main dream to buy his own home, of course, still far away, but already much better than it was. James grew up in a small village with a speaking name Oaks. Surrounding this place were groves of oaks, especially picturesque in the fall. Little James, as a preschooler, tried to draw them, these beautiful trees. And then, as he grew older, he tried to put what he saw on paper. But it just didn't work. I guess I didn't have enough talent. Childhood is the happiest and coziest time of James' life. The grown man often remembered his early years with nostalgia. And it's not even that. At that time, he had a roof over his head, his own bed with clean linen, a guaranteed bowl of soup every day. It's that he was loved then. He wasn't alone. His grandmother, sweet, kind Grandma Patricia, wise, forgiving, warm. It had seemed to James for a long time that she was omnipotent. It was Grandma who always found the right words to dispel her grandson's sadness and anxiety. She was the one who understood what to do in any given situation. She was respected by her neighbors. She seemed to know everything in the world. Also, Grandma was never tired. At least, James couldn't remember her sleeping. When he went to bed, Grandma was still tending to the chores, and when James woke up, she was up and about. Smart, smiling. Grandma was a sturdy woman. Tall, statuesque, energetic. She could not sit idle, always found something to do, worked, maintained the household, and raised her grandson. Yes, a grandmother. This woman did not look like a gray-haired old woman in a sharp scarf. No, James's grandmother was still young, just as he remembered her. Energetic, active, businesslike. Later, James missed her gaze, her warm embrace, her gentle, soothing voice. He sobbed at the impossibility of changing everything. Blaming himself, screaming helplessly into the void. Hopelessness. That's how James would characterize his state of mind. It was not terrible to lose the house. The guy at that time, this moment, was almost not interested. The main thing is that his grandmother was no longer there. James had no other relatives. It happened that way. In villages where almost everyone was a brother-in-law, nephew, or distant relative, it was strange. But what could be done? Grandmother Patricia had come to Oaks as a young girl after her husband, whose name was also James. Grandson was named after his grandfather. He was a good man, kind, hard-working, and skillful. And at work, at the sawmill, he was appreciated and neighbors respected. And James S.R. grew up in an orphanage. He didn't know his family, that's why, probably, he dreamed of creating a strong, big family. Once he went to work in a village almost 100 kilometers away. It's the Pines. It's a remote area. He met a beautiful, modest girl named Patricia. And so it was that they ended up getting married. James and Patricia moved to the Oaks. They became a family at James' house. James worked at his sawmill. Patricia got a job on the farm as a milkmaid. Everything was fine. Everything was fine. All right. They lived soul to soul. Both spouses dreamed of a large family and at least 5 children. But it didn't happen. The couple had a daughter, Hannah. The young parents were not going to stop at this achievement. But the years went by, and Hannah remained the only child in the family. The girl grew up beautiful, not like her mother or father. They were simple country folk, but this was white bone. Fine features, fragile figure, huge violet eyes and golden curls. A princess, indeed. The locals joked about whether Patricia had fattened up such a beauty somewhere in the city. But James had no doubts about his wife's fidelity. The man didn't know his own family and rightly assumed that his daughter had taken after one of his relatives. This was most likely the case. The girl's character matched her appearance. She was smart, capricious, self-loving. And when Hannah grew a little older and realized that she had an attractive appearance, she became proud. Hannah had simple and hardworking parents. Their family lived no worse or better than anyone else. But Hannah was sure that she deserved more. She dreamed of living in a big city and blamed her parents for not bothering to move there in their time. She demanded toys from her mother and father, then outfits and jewelry. She refused to do housework, arguing that she was not going to stay in the countryside for long, and that she needed to study, not sweep floors. Except Hannah wasn't studying. Or rather, she did study, but not at all what they teach in school. She bought magazines and tried to make herself look like one of those models that flashed on the pages of glossy editions. She did makeup, washed and painted a new face again, achieving the perfect result. I learned how to combine closet items correctly, to make different hairstyles out of my golden hair. And it all started when Hannah was about 12. Maybe even a little earlier. I'll go to the city, become a photo model, she said. Maybe even go abroad. But I'm not going to live in a shithole like you, Hannah said. Patricia and James looked at each other in confusion. They both blamed themselves for their daughter's behavior. But what had they done wrong? Patricia herself had grown up in absolute poverty, and even starved. That's why, probably, she tried to please her only daughter, and even a beautiful one at that. James, that in general did not know parental love and was brought up in an orphanage. What can I say? The man, spoiled, of course, long awaited his child. And yet both spouses tried to instill in Hannah basic moral principles. By their example, they showed that it is necessary to work. It is necessary to work. It is necessary to treat others with respect. Patricia taught her daughter to bake pies, to clean the house. Except that the girl from childhood rejected parental attitudes and with all her appearance showed that she dreams of a completely different life. And when she became a teenager, then James and Patricia, that only about themselves, did not listen. And they're losers and they don't think things through. You have no right to tell me what to do. Shouted at her mother and father when they tried to talk some sense into their princess and force her to learn to help them with their chores. You don't. You've done nothing for yourselves. One works at a sawmill for a penny, the other is a dung shoveler in a barn, and there you go. I'm not like you. I want to live differently, and I will. I'll marry a rich man, or become a model. Who'd marry you, you inept girl? Her father tried to talk some sense into Hannah. You can't cook or clean. Your mother still takes care of you. Don't worry about that. I'm not marrying a village idiot. I'm marrying a rich man. They have servants for all that, answered Hannah. Her parents could not change her mind. She became more and more capricious and more angry. She didn't want to study. She didn't help at home. All she had to do was to look at fashion magazines and spend time on the street with her friends. By the way, Hannah had plenty of admirers on the street. But how could such a beautiful girl? And it was not only boys' classmates, but also grown-up guys. That's what scared Patricia the most. They had conversations with her daughter. She just laughed in their faces. James tried to be tough, locking his wayward daughter up at home to keep her out of trouble. But Hannah always escaped, either through the window, or she got a moment when her mother and father were distracted and ran out the door. She wanted company, wanted to see admiring glances, to hear compliments. All this fueled her faith in herself, her confidence in her own irresistibility, even more convinced that she was worthy of some mythical, better life. And in another life, Beauty dreamed of getting to the other life easy way. Studying at school and then at university, she was not interested. The girl believed that it is too long and difficult. This is for those who were unlucky enough to be born a beauty with huge violet eyes and golden curls, she said. All this was told to the grown-up James by his neighbor Claire. She called his mother Hannah Tales. His grandmother, on the other hand, never spoke ill of his mother, only sighed at her fate. Well, she also blamed herself for missing her daughter somewhere. Not looking out, James recalled. Claire, on the other hand, cut the truth straight and didn't try to soften the edges. Your mother's a beauty, I can't say. But she's lazy. And she wasn't very bright either. She wanted to fly high. She didn't have the brains to do the math. And so it turned out the way it did. It wasn't her grandmother and grandfather's fault. They did everything for their daughter. They're good people. It's probably just genes from Henry's family. That's why he grew up in an orphanage. Who puts their kids in an orphanage like that? Misguided. And only people like Hannah. If it wasn't for Grandma, you'd have had to grow up in an orphanage too. Hannah was barely 18. She ran away from her parents' home. And not to study in the city like many other village boys and girls, but after her fiancé. A guy from the city, a student, and a local boy came to visit them once in Seneki. His friend had come to see his parents, so he brought his fellow student with him. The groom's name was Ethan. He was also a student at the university and already drove his own car. His father had given it to him for his coming of age. Ethan was handsome and stylish, just like an actor from a youth show. Naturally, Hannah immediately met him. The village beauty charmed the young man. They had an instant romance. But Ethan took Hannah to the city. They started living together in his apartment. Ethan was studying, Hannah was a housewife. She didn't even study to get a foothold in the city. Cooking, scrubbing floors, that's all she did. Ethan and Hannah lived a well-to-do fun life thanks to the young man's father's money going out to clubs and restaurants, even traveling. Naturally, James went to the city and tried to bring his wayward daughter home. He understood where this was going, but she flatly refused to go, and there was nothing he could do. Hannah was already 18, so she had the right to run her own life as she saw fit. Hannah had spent too much time in the village. Her parents got her a job as a clerk in the local store, since she didn't want to study. She lived a miserable existence, dreaming of a beautiful life. She was angry at her fate, at her father and mother, at the local village boys who could not fulfill her dreams. What kept her from running away to the city, even to nowhere, were her parents. They were endlessly urging her to get smart, lecturing her, controlling her adult daughter, explaining it all with fear for her future. Hannah would have run away from them without a shame, but where and on what money? The girl tried to send her photos to a modeling agency, but to her own surprise, she did not receive any answers. Hannah thought that the offers would come at her like a cornucopia, but no such luck. She continued to think over the plan, communicated on dating sites, received a lot of compliments and offers, but she was afraid. Hannah hadn't seen these people in person. There's no telling who might be out there on the other side of the monitor. It was her parents who planted those fears in her, which made her hate them even more. And then Ethan showed up, a prince in a black Audi. He rescued the beautiful girl from captivity, took her away from the hated, dirty village, poor parents, moralizing. That's how Hannah perceived her departure. She had escaped, broken free. It didn't work out with Ethan. In the end, he quickly found someone else. But Hannah was in no hurry to return to the village. She had a new beau, lower in status than Major Ethan, but not bad either. That relationship didn't work out either. But a new one loomed ahead. Hannah lowered the bar in the choice of suitors. The suitors changed one after another. One thing remained unchanged: the girl lived at the expense of these people, gave them her tenderness, youth, beauty, and in return received a roof over her head, food, some gifts, trips to cafes and clubs. Life seemed to Hannah not quite what she had dreamed of, but she wasn't going back to the village. James and Patricia were heartbroken to see what their daughter was becoming. Her once golden curls had faded, her voice rough and hoarse. Her skin took on an unhealthy hue. Hannah drank heavily, started smoking. All this, of course, reflected on her health and appearance. James was very worried about the path his only daughter had taken. It was a huge shock to her father. Patricia hoped that Hannah would come to her senses and get her mind right. She'd had enough of such a life with one man, then another. And they were not such wealthy and handsome young men as Ethan. They were more like battered men of marginal appearance. James and Patricia worked somewhere, so they had money, and Hannah lived in the city at the expense of her admirers. She'd been transformed from a golden-haired princess into a gray woman with a dysfunctional appearance. It was hard to imagine that she had once looked so different. She had dreamed of a rich, beautiful life, spent hours perfecting her makeup. Hannah was going downhill fast and didn't seem to notice it at all. She felt happy and didn't want to go back to her parents. James's heart ached for his daughter, literally. The man had suffered 2 heart attacks in a row. Patricia was also worried, of course, but in her heart she hoped that everything would be all right. Hannah was still very young. But James, it seems, realized that nothing good could come out of Hannah. He didn't survive a 3rd heart attack. So Patricia was left all alone in the village house. No husband. Daughters living a wild life in the city. Yeah, it's not how she imagined her old age. At least she had a job. The woman still worked as a milkmaid on the farm. There's socializing, some kind of life there. And at home? Loneliness, cold, 4 walls. On New Year's Eve, an unprecedented event happened. Hannah came to her mother in the village. Patricia, seeing the dear guest, immediately began to clutter, to collect the table. Her daughter did not look well, pale, swollen face. When Hannah took off her jacket, Patricia gasped. Her belly was rounded under her sweater. Hannah was pregnant, and it looked like she'd been pregnant for a long time. It turned out that the father of the child is another suitor, Hannah Trucker. He rented an apartment in the city, earned good money, enough to live on, and to get drunk when he was not on a trip. Pregnancy, of course, no one planned. It just happened. Learning about what happened, the admirer was frightened. He admitted that he already has a family in another city, a wife and 2 children. He doesn't need heirs on the side. Gave him money to solve the problem. But Hannah was turned away at the hospital. All the terms were out, but there were no indications to terminate the pregnancy, as the child was developing well. It was surprising, considering that Hannah, being pregnant, did not deny herself alcohol. Further, everything was ridiculously banal. The admirer ran away, quickly disappeared. Hannah lived in their apartment for a few more months until the lease was up, but she had nowhere to go. Who would want her? She couldn't get another boyfriend, so she returned to her home village. Patricia hoped things would get better for them now, and the fact that the child will not have a father, so it's not a problem. She would manage, raise him, teach him, put him on his feet. The woman was counting on Hannah's maternal instincts to kick in, to change her and make her softer, more loving, more caring. It didn't work out. Hannah barely survived to give birth in the hated village. By the way, the baby was born prematurely weak and very small. He was nursed in the hospital for almost a month. Hannah immediately gave up her son. She didn't need him. And here and premature, obviously sick. So she gave up the baby at the hospital and went back to the city. Now she could again live in her own pleasure, go to cafes and restaurants in search of new love. Have fun without a belly. Everything is better. Everything is easier. After learning about her daughter's deed, Patricia rushed to the maternity hospital, explained the situation to people. She was understood. The refusal documents were canceled. Patricia's neighbor's niece worked there as head doctor. That's how it was resolved through her. But we had to find Hannah. The baby's mother had to be present and sign the paperwork. Hannah at first insisted that she did not need her son, and it would be better for him to go to an orphanage. But Patricia convinced her daughter the boy should stay in the family. She found arguments. I will take care of him. Do not be afraid. Live as you have lived. But you'll get an allowance for him. And a lot of money. You're a single mom. Patricia took this step for her grandson. Convinced her daughter to agree to it because of child support. Otherwise, Hannah would never have kept the baby. And Patricia would not have been given custody, and the conditions are not ideal, and the age is already solid. So little James stayed with his grandmother in the village. His mother, the beautiful Hannah, James knew only from the stories of his grandmother, neighbors, and their photos. The woman was not interested in the fate of the child, only occasionally came to his mother to rest between the next complex novels. A vague image remained in James's memory, a woman who smelled pungent, hoarse, unpleasant. She was yelling at his grandmother, demanding something, and little James was scared. But of course he couldn't remember his parent well, because Hannah had died when he was barely 4. Another roommate in a drunken brawl did not calculate forces. That's how Hannah's life ended quite naturally. His grandmother told James many times that she had survived that period, after Hannah's death, only because of the little grandson she had to take care of. They didn't have much money, times were hard, and a milkmaid's wages were not luxurious. But James considered his childhood happy, energetic, strong, caring grandmother, friends, soft bed, the aroma of pies and fried potatoes. Yes, James did not have an expensive computer, game consoles, branded sneakers, what is considered the ultimate joy for teenagers. But he never went hungry or wore rags. James tried to help his grandmother with everything. Growing up, he realized that life at home and loved one was not easy. Restless boy tried to please her as much as he could. True, to study well did not work. Grandmother engaged with him, tried to explain complex topics, but did not add up something in his head. And that's it, said the neighbor of the grandmother, Claire. That's because Hannah drank while she was carrying him. They were sitting in the kitchen drinking tea and thought James couldn't hear a thing. Yeah, but who cares? Grandma waved her hand. The main thing is that he's healthy, strong, and kind. Not everyone has to be a scientist, and James will find his place in life. He's so handy, like his grandfather, I suppose. James was really good at fixing things, making things, that's him, and no one taught him how to do it on purpose. He watched other people do it and picked it up on the fly, not like math. By the time James finished school, the financial situation of their small family had completely deteriorated. The farm paid a pittance. His grandmother's pension was also very small, especially compared to the ever-increasing prices. James worked part-time, mending neighbors' fences and cutting people's grass, digging potatoes, even helping to build houses. But the earnings were irregular and small. With those grades and the certificate, James had no sense to think about college, let alone university. But the boy still decided to go to the city. There are more opportunities to earn money there, to settle in life, and his grandmother needs financial help. She's been dragging him down so much already. Go, Patricia said yes. You're a serious guy with a backbone. I'm not as worried about you as I was about Hannah. You won't be lost. You won't go off the straight and narrow. Just be careful. You're still young, and there's so much danger out there. Don't worry, Grandma. James put his arm around his grandmother's shoulders. Everything will be fine. I'll go to the construction site as a laborer. I can knead cement, lay bricks, and plaster and paint. I'm a jack of all trades, in general. I'll definitely find a use for me there. I'll earn for an apartment, and I'll take you right away. Grandmother smiled, but her eyes were still sad, even though she'd said James wouldn't be lost. She must have had a premonition of trouble. The city stunned James at first. Crowds of rushing people, streams of cars. No, the boy, of course, had been to the city before. But it was one thing to come with his grandmother to do some shopping or file some paperwork. and quite another to be here for a long time alone to become a resident of this noisy metropolis. Where to start? Where to go? James found several advertisements in advance back in the village. At the construction site often needed workers. So he decided to try young, strong. This guy was gladly hired to build another supermarket. The object was almost ready. Finishing works were left. The crew was running out of time. They needed helpers. James fit the bill. He was even provided with accommodation, a caravan hut. True, he had to share it with the workers, but it was nothing, but it was free. Having received the first money, James immediately rented an apartment. He wanted to start looking for a new job, but the job found him. One of the workers, who lived with James in the apartment, called him to the new object. "They'll pay well," the bearded man assured him. "As soon as we get the results, we'll get the money." James didn't object to this settlement scheme. He had money saved from his previous earnings, so he didn't worry about what he would have to live on all this time. The work was going on, the arguments. James was anticipating that pretty soon he would have some good money. Then he could send some of it to his grandmother. He knew she had debts, borrowing from neighbors to send her grandson to the city. She was afraid to let the guy go without any money at all. Soon he'll pay her back with a raise. She'll be so happy. It didn't work out. This time the owners simply screwed the laborers. Maybe it was the bearded man who took James' money and ran off with it. Maybe he was the cheater, realized James was a naive rookie. It was useless to appeal to the police or the labor inspectorate. No one signed official contracts with the workers. No one would take his word for it. James was in a desperate situation. The money he had set aside had run out. He had no money to pay the rent, and there was almost no money left for bread. James spent days running around the city looking for work. As luck would have it, unskilled laborers were not needed anywhere. And then one day, after another unsuccessful attempt to get a job at a construction site, James wandered towards the bus stop. He was filled with a variety of unpleasant feelings: fear, despair, resentment. And then someone called out to him. "Hey kid, are you looking for a job?" James turned around. Behind him stood two guys about 25 years old, tall, tanned to black. They were construction laborers. They work on the street, hence the calluses, the tanned faces, and the broad palms, glowing with mud. "I'm looking," James nodded. "And just because we need help. It's not a big deal. Just one thing to unload into a car. But the pay is good." A doubt crept into James's soul. What if he was being deceived again? He didn't want to step on the same toes again. He wanted to try to get an official job. But there was no way out. He had to stay in the city to find a job. You gotta pay rent, you gotta have money for food. So he decided to take a risk. "I'm with you," he said. "All right," replied the man. "So we'll meet here tonight at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock tonight, James clarified, and it seemed strange. Why so late? "The owners are leaving late. We'll go in after them, start taking everything out. They don't want to be involved in all this fuss, so they're paying well." James shrugged. The rich have their quirks. "I'll be there," he promised his new acquaintances. James was there at the right time. The guys he'd arranged with were late, or maybe they wouldn't show up at all. James wouldn't be too upset. Sure, he needed the money, but these men looked too suspicious. There was insincerity in them, falseness. James kept thinking they'd cheat him, not pay him, like the bearded man. But the guys showed up a few minutes late, but they came. Or rather, they arrived when an old, broken-down, open-body truck pulled into the parking lot. James didn't even look at it, didn't even think it was after him. But the driver's door swung open, and one of James' daytime companions looked out. "What are you standing there for? Get in. We're already late," he said. James obeyed and got into the seat next to the driver. The other guy was here too. He said a discreet hello and stared out the window again. Unlike his buddy, this second guy was silent and frowning. They drove for a long time, almost an hour, first through the city, then the highway, then a country road. Everything that was happening seemed increasingly suspicious to James, but he realized that at this point there was unlikely to be a quick and easy way out of the case. At best, the two men would drop him off at night without a dime in his pocket somewhere outside the city. At worst. He didn't even want to think about that. The driver was joking now and then, smiling. James had a strong feeling that he was playing the brave guy, trying to seem calm and relaxed, but he was worried. The other was silent, as usual. He didn't react to his buddy's words, just stared at the road. Finally, the truck stopped near a plot of land enclosed by a high fence. The driver opened the gate with a key. James exhaled as long as he had the keys. Then everything was really okay. "You stay in the yard. We're going in the house." The driver ordered. "We'll be handing you the boxes. You put them in the back of the truck. We'll be done in no time." The boys went into the house. James noted that they also had a key to the front door. It was silent and dark, the kind of darkness that only happened in the countryside. Large stars peered down from the sky. James involuntarily admired the night sky. He thought of his hometown. He thought of his grandmother, wondering what she was doing now. Probably drinking tea with Grandma Claire in the cozy kitchen. And old women were always talking about him, about James. I felt like going home to the only person I'd ever known. He wanted to be a little boy again, for whom his grandmother was a loving and all-powerful being. The driver's hoarse voice interrupted James from his pleasant thoughts. "What are you dreaming about?" "Standing like a pillar. Take the box." James obediently dragged the container into the truck as agreed. The box was heavy. I wondered what was inside: books, dishes, maybe just some household stuff. No sooner had James returned to the front porch than the silence of the September night was broken by the wail of a police siren. The darkness was struck by the glow of a flashing beacon. James had hoped that the police cars would drive past the station to the scene of the accident, but they stopped right outside the gate. What happened next happened quickly. James's brain was fixating on individual frames. Here the garden fills with uniformed men. Some of them rush into the house, another part starts to search the plot. James is rolled to the ground lightly, as if he weighs nothing. His arms are twisted painfully behind his back. His face is tickled by dry grasses. Sand is stuffed into his nose and mouth. James sneezes once or twice. It's hard to breathe. Someone roughly turns James' face sideways. The boy gulps greedily for air. On the dark womb of a police van, James sits handcuffed on a hard bench. There are uniformed men nearby. The driver and the other guy are nowhere to be seen. They seem to have escaped. That's what James deduces from the scraps of phrases exchanged between the law. "Where are your accomplices?" James is approached by a stout man in camouflage. "Do you know where they went?" James shakes his head negatively. He wants to explain to these people that those who ran away are not his accomplices, that they met for the first time only this morning, that these guys just offered him a job, and James needed the money. But James doesn't say anything. First of all, they're not likely to believe him. The guy replayed his speech in his head and realized it sounds very improbable. Secondly, his tongue became alien from fear, as if it were too big and clumsy. And my mouth was dry. He was very thirsty, but James didn't dare to ask the policeman for water. "Do you even know whose cottage you are going to rob?" The man in the camouflage turned to the terrified boy again. "Samantha's attorney. The summer house." "I'll give you assholes the full program now," said the man in camouflage. Then James was interrogated. The investigator, a middle-aged man with a tired, angry look, asked him questions like a hardened criminal. James told the truth. He wasn't believed, of course. Who would have doubted it? The two men had escaped, gone into hiding. They were being searched for. James had assumed that the cops wouldn't succeed. Now, he was sure he'd met experienced criminals. They'd probably get away with it. But what would happen to him? James was sent to the holding cell until morning. Black cell, hard bunks. A very special, indescribable odor. A calm and silent neighbor who didn't even ask what James was in jail for. All day long, the big, scowling man lay on his shelf and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes he would be taken somewhere, and then James would be alone. It turned out that the truck the thieves had come to get him in had been reported stolen. They decided to pin it on James, too. There was no use explaining to the men in uniform that James couldn't drive a car. "I haven't had time to learn. I don't even have a license. It's easy to check," he said. We've got half the country driving without a license. That's not a handicap, he replied. The trial was held unexpectedly quickly. Only a few days after the arrest, the grandmother was present at the hearing. She had been informed in time. James didn't expect to see her. He was in the defendant's seat. All the evidence was against him. He was ashamed to look his grandmother in the eye, even though James realized that he was not guilty of anything. But his grandmother doesn't know. She must think he's a criminal. Grandma looked thin and old all at once. There were shadows under her eyes. There were more wrinkles. Her gaze was troubled, sad, but loving. She looked at James without judgment, with tenderness and love. It gave the boy strength. When the judge announced the verdict, James' eyes darkened. He realized he wouldn't be acquitted, but he had hoped for a much lighter sentence. He even secretly wished for house arrest. He wasn't a repeat offender, after all. 8 years in a strict regime colony, the judge's verdict sounded ruthlessly. Grandma gasped, clutched her heart, and grew old before her eyes. So what is it? He's a child, he almost stumbled. He was confused by adult criminals. They tricked him and ran away. It's clear as day, she wailed. And James went to a colony in another region. The long gray days dragged on like twins. Wake up, a meager breakfast, work in the industrial zone, a walk in the cramped prison yard, sometimes searches and inspections. Lunch, dinner, periodic medical examinations. Occasional holidays for the prisoners. The dreary monotony, the peculiar odor, the filth, the despair, the fear. James was always lucky with his neighbors. They were much more human than the guards. Each had his own complicated fate. James, as the youngest, was even pitied in his own way. They realized that it was bad luck for a young, naive boy to meet dangerous people on his way. James now had a lot of time to think. He was going through his universities, getting to know people, getting to know life. Now the guy was clearly realizing how naive and stupid he had been. James wouldn't fall for such a trick again. He'd do things differently. But you don't fight back. Sometimes James had a visit from his grandmother. Each visit, James noticed new wrinkles on her face. The boy was getting older, and his grandmother was getting older. James knew that she now had heart problems, and he realized who was responsible for the illness of his own. Of course, worrying about his grandson did its job, rewarded the grandmother with a serious ailment. She needed an operation, but it cost money. And where to get it? James knew that the grandmother had tried several times to appeal for leniency for her grandson, even hired lawyers. But it hadn't worked out. James had answered to the full extent of the law, and only because the victims included a prosecutor. And those people are known to have a lot of connections. How many times during these 8 years James dreamed of going back to that unfortunate day and refused the offer of 2 strangers to earn money? His whole life would have turned out differently. "It's okay, grandson." "With everything happens," calmed his grandmother. "Calm down, everything will be all right." James tried to be brave in front of her. But she saw everything, understood everything. "You've been duped, it's all right. The price is high, but it's just the beginning of life. When you get out, we'll make up for it. Everything will be fine," she said. James smiled. His grandmother's words made him feel lighter and warmer. And it really did feel like everything would work out. The main thing was that he had someone who loved him, who waited, who would never deceive or betray him. And then his grandmother suddenly disappeared. James was worried when she didn't show up for his birthday. Usually she always showed up by that date, and then there was no sign of her. His grandmother's phone didn't answer. James asked the guards several times for permission to use his cell phone. The guards were kind people too, even though they weren't supposed to be. They let the prisoners make calls. But these calls were useless. Just long beeps, that's all. And then James finally got called to the visiting room. The guy flew there like he was on wings. He was relieved. He imagined hugging his grandmother, telling her he missed her so much. But on the familiar gray sofa sat his neighbor, Grandma Claire. She was tense, anxious. "Hello, James," she said, hugging her neighbor awkwardly. "You've lost a lot of weight. Don't they feed you here?" Then, in a broken voice, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief, Grandma Claire told James the terrible news. "Patricia's dead. She had a heart attack." So the ambulance didn't get here in time. How was I supposed to wait for you? I was dreaming, making plans, sobbed Grandma Claire. You could see that she had not yet come to terms with the loss of her friend neighbor. I couldn't wait. The neighbors organized the funeral. I thought someone was trying to get you to go and say goodbye to your grandmother. No way. It's not allowed, that's all. Not that they didn't let me go. They didn't even tell me about the tragedy. How come? How could it be? James mumbled. How can I come home and she's gone? There's nowhere to go. Claire looked at him confused. Don't you know that? It turns out that after James went to prison, Grandma Patricia had taken out a lot of loans. Thought a good lawyer would get her favorite grandson out of jail. Only it didn't work out even with good lawyers. The loans were secured against the house. Consequently, when the owner died, the property went to the bank. It was another blow, much less sensitive than the first, but still. The house isn't just a house. It's James's place of power. A quiet, cozy harbor with which the guy has a lot of pleasant associations, warm memories. And now what? Someone alien would live there. Since then, James felt lonely and not needed by anyone. No grandmother. Then why is he on this earth? What for? He used to think to please his grandmother, to watch over her in her old age. He was working hard for her, striving for something. Now what's it all for? But you've got to make a living. So James adapted to the cold and darkness of prison. He ate, slept, worked, everything was automatic. His mind was constantly replaying scenes from his childhood, when his grandmother was still young and strong. And he promised her that he would support his grandmother in her old age. But the grandmother never lived to be old. Liberation did not bring the expected joy. Rather the opposite. Where to go, what to do, where to sleep, what to eat. There were more questions than answers. At least James had a small amount of money saved up over the years of working in the industrial zone. He went to the city with it. Where else? He's bruised. James realized that no one was waiting for him in the village. Even though Grandma Claire said she'd be willing to take him in. She invited him to visit her after his release, but the guy realized that these were just polite words. Why would she want a felon in her house? In the city, James spent money on hotel and food. The savings melted away in a week, but it was also the beginning of hard times. There were a lot of things and had to sleep on the street and get into street fights and eat from the dumpster. James got sick a couple times, so he thought he'd never make it. And even was glad of this outcome, but the young body recovered again and again. And no one needed gray, dull, joyless life continued. James tried begging. He got a serious beating for it. It turned out to be a whole business, and you can't just enter it by choice. The guy went through the dumpsters and the bins near restaurants and cafes. There was always something to eat, and in the city dump you could find clothes in season. James didn't even want to think about what he'd become. A dirty, ragged bum. If his grandmother had seen him. No, this wasn't how he'd imagined growing up. He was disgusted with himself. Then one day James was walking past a house under construction and noticed that the workers weren't laying the tiles correctly. It turned out that not all the construction skills were out of his head yet. The foreman was surprised, looking at the homeless man incredulously. Then followed his advice, appreciated the result, smiled, and the unbelievable happened. James was offered a job. Of course, he jumped at the opportunity. The foreman's name was Henry. He had his own small construction company. The guys were engaged in minor repairs, construction of small buildings, and the crew needed some smart guys. So James got a job. The pay, of course, was not much, but the man was happy about it. After so many years of hunger and wandering, a permanent job seemed like a gift from fate. Henry appreciated James for his diligence and dexterity. Over time, he learned the young man's story and helped him settle into life a little. For example, he told him that it was not necessary to rent a whole apartment or live in a hotel. It was too expensive. It is much more profitable in James's position to sleep in a hostel. It turns out that in the city there are such budget lodgings, huge rooms filled with bunk beds. To rent a place for the night in such an establishment cost a penny. Now James was falling asleep in a warm bed. Dozens of neighbors snored around him, but that didn't bother the man, who was used to much harsher conditions. James had a job to do. He no longer slept outside, and Henry had become something of a mentor to the man who'd been thrown to the wayside, helping him with paperwork, big purchases, hospitalizations, and so on. Henry advised James to start saving for his own place. You can't stay in a hostel forever. A man needs his own place, even if not a luxurious apartment, but at least a small one on the outskirts, so that there was a place to lay his head. And James began to save little by little, month by month. The man always kept his savings with him. He made a secret pocket in his shirt. When Henry found out about it, he grabbed his head. Are you out of your mind? Who does that? How? James didn't understand. Where am I supposed to leave them? Like burying a treasure in the ground in the woods? Not as treasure, but as a deposit. You and I are going to open a bank account. James was afraid to entrust his hard-earned money to a bank. He'd been cheated many times in his life, and brutally so, but Henry convinced him. And now homeless James even had his own account. The man funded it with regularity. The numbers kept climbing. Someday James would be able to realize his dream and buy a house or an apartment. Living in a hostel had its advantages. James often met a variety of people. Amazing fates, sometimes complicated, sometimes even scary. Lots of different stories. People in the hostel were like fellow travelers on trains, generously sharing details of their life stories with each other. It was fascinating. James regretted that he'd never learned to read and write. If he had been able to write well, he would have published a thick collection of stories. People would be interested in reading about the lives of others. Some of the stories were a veritable treasure trove of wisdom and experience. One day, the bunk shelf next to James's bed was occupied by a new neighbor. He was a man a little older than James himself. He didn't come alone, but with a boy about 6 years old. The child and the man looked uncannily alike. The same green eyes with a slightly sly squint, copper-red hair, and a face and hands like Pushkin's. It's clear at once father and son. Henry and Louis is small. Louis, like most of the hostel's permanent residents, had a hard history with these people. James recognized it around the third, fourth day of being neighbors with the red-haired couple. Henry, much like James, had grown up in the village. He had been raised by his mother. The man never knew his father. They lived poorly, but they didn't starve. There was always food in the house. His mother worked, Henry studied, tried hard. He had a dream of becoming a lawyer. It seemed to the boy that people in this profession are practically heavenly. They help resolve disputes, do justice, and, importantly, earn good money, so they can afford an apartment in a big city, a beautiful car, travel to the sea. You see, I wanted to take my mother to the sea, Henry told James in a confidential whisper. The lights were off in the room. There was the sound of snoring coming from the many bunks in the hostel. Little Louis was asleep, too, curled up under the blanket. Henry and James were having a conversation. A pleasant, almost friendly conversation. James told his neighbor about his fate. It happened by itself, simply and naturally. And Henry responded with frankness to frankness. Henry realized that it was hard for his mother to carry him alone. He wished he could grow up, get on his feet, make her life a fairy tale. Mother had never been to the sea. She couldn't pay for such a trip, but she dreamed of going. Henry saw she watched movies about the sea, took a long look at pictures of acquaintances from beach vacations. I think she even dreamed about the sea. Anyway, Henry entered college to study law, went to the city, settled in a dormitory. His mother stayed in the village. The boy's dreams were shattered gradually. He learned that lawyers are not always on the side of truth. Often you have to adjust to the situation to people. This was discovered in practice in court, and the tasks that are solved by representatives of this profession often have nothing to do with something heroic. The majority of lawyers are engaged in real estate registration, or at all papers or going through in offices for pennies. That's how one of the college professors put it. And Henry had no reason not to trust him. The kid's down. He thought it was worth it to enroll, and that's it. Fate was settled. A happy future was guaranteed. But no. Still, Henry tried, he studied. After all, there were other lawyers, fighters for justice, defenders of the wronged and oppressed. It was hard to break through, of course, but there's always a chance. A small one, though. The older Henry grew, the clearer he realized that everywhere you need connections and money. And he, a country boy, had neither. Henry finished his college and got a job in the housing and utilities sector, working for a pittance, just as the teacher had predicted. There were plenty of lawyers looking for work at the time, so the inexperienced college graduate was glad to have the job. Now he's on the labor exchange. He rented a room in a dormitory and adjusted his life. His mother was happy for her son. After all, in the city he got a grip, made his way. She was the only person who believed in Henry's brilliant future. And this faith kept the guy afloat, forced him to move forward. He worked in the housing and utilities sector, but was looking for more interesting options. No luck, though. All the good jobs were occupied firmly and for a long time. It seems that there were even queues of the right people for them. But Henry tried not to be discouraged. He had little doubt that sooner or later luck would smile on him. And then his mother died. Henry lowered his head. Even in the semi-darkness, James could see that the man was barely holding back tears. It was obvious that the wound had not yet healed. The heart. And as the doctor said later, he should have gone to the hospital for surgery a long time ago. And Mom. She kept thinking it would go away, taking pills, putting off going to the hospital. I know why they wouldn't let her off work. No, of course they would have. Sick leave, sick leave. But while she was getting treatment, they would have fired her somehow. They'd find a way. It's happened in our village before. Everyone needs healthy young workers. And Mom? She was afraid of being left without money because she had no one to rely on. I was no good as a protector and benefactor. I was barely making ends meet myself. How could I blame myself for that? For not being my mother's rock. I didn't have the time. Henry was taking the loss hard. The realization came gradually. James understood his tablemate as well as anyone. Henry's story seemed to take him back to the time when he was suddenly without his grandmother. James had felt the same way, and he too had blamed himself endlessly for not keeping his loved ones safe. I don't know what would have happened to me in the end, Henry continued. Maybe I would have lived like a robot. Maybe I would have done something stupid. All sorts of thoughts were running through my head at the time. It's hard to even think about it now. But then Shelley came into my life. And everything started to, I don't even know how to explain it. Anyway, she got me out. Shelley got a job as a janitor at the same utility company where Henry worked. She was a sweet, modest girl with constantly troubled gray eyes framed by fluffy eyelashes. Henry didn't notice her at first. Newcomers often showed up and then left. The turnover was due to a combination of heavy workloads, neglectful bosses, and very modest salaries. But one day the guy literally bumped into Shelley in the hallway. He was in a hurry to get to the next office and bumped into a girl moving toward him. How did he not notice? Shelley gasped. Henry grabbed her by the shoulders, holding her up so she wouldn't fall. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. He was about to continue on his way when he saw her eyes. No, of course, Henry had met Shelley before in the yard at work, in line at the cash register, and in general. He'd glimpsed her in the cafeteria, but he'd never noticed her. After his mother's death, everything around him was gray and inexpressive. There was little that interested Henry, little that attracted his attention. But those eyes were bottomless lakes, impossible to look away from. Touching eyes like a Disney cartoon. So much anxiety in them, so much awe. Henry suddenly felt like someone strong, confident, almost omnipotent. He wanted to be near her, to take care of her, to protect her from the dangers of this life. For the first time since the tragedy, the boys suddenly felt alive. They stopped right there in the corridor. Each of them had forgotten where they were going. Henry apologized for running into the girl, smiled. Shelley began to assure him it was no big deal. Word by word, and somehow the young people agreed to go on their first date. That's the story of an acquaintance. It soon became clear that Shelley and Henry had a lot in common. First, they were the same age. Secondly, at their young ages, both are already having to make their own way in this life. Neither Shelley nor Henry had any older relatives ready to help them in life, to become mentors and support, or close friends. That's just the way it is. Shelley grew up in an orphanage. She knew nothing about her parents except that both were alcoholics on the street. That's the characterization the teacher used when she told the girl about her past. The child was taken away from the marginalized couple because the girl was in danger with her parents. Did these people love her? Were they trying to bring her back? Shelley didn't know for sure, but she assumed not. Because if to other pupils at least sometimes someone came swollen, unkempt mothers with dirty lollipops, strange-looking homeless fathers, decrepit grandmothers lowered, lost, but still relatives and not indifferent people, then Shelley in general nobody and never visited. And she wanted to see her own, to feel their love. The girl would forgive these people everything, would accept them and understand. But no one came. Life in the orphanage was not easy. Cruel children, angry teachers. Quiet, humble Shelley had a hard time. She lived her life waiting for the next blow, the next bullying. The kids sensed the quiet ones and used them for their own amusement. Shelley was locked in a dark bathroom at night. She was robbed of New Year's gifts donated to orphanages from the city government. Her clothes were often stained with paint or plasticine. More than once Shelley was beaten just to show her strength and superiority. And the girl could neither fight back nor complain. One day Shelley told the teachers about the bullying of her peers. She herself was blamed. Adults said that she needed to be more communicative. She needed to find a common language with other people, scared her with diagnoses. But the offenders were punished. But Shelley didn't feel any better. On the contrary, she was then spotted in the yard, dragged behind the gazebo and beaten again for complaining. The girl never asked adults for help again. Shelley didn't study very well, and she would have liked to be an excellent student. She reached for knowledge, read a lot, but it did not work. It was impossible to learn her lessons. Other pupils interfered, they made noise, molested and even, sometimes, took away notebooks and textbooks. In the orphanage, striving for knowledge and diligent study was considered something shameful. Shelley was called a nerd. Bookworm was demeaned. In general, no one in the orphanage really studied, and the teachers gave lessons for a tick. Once Shelley even heard a conversation between teachers. The math teacher contemptuously threw the teacher of Russian, "Why are you prostrating yourself in front of these morons? They won't be of any use anyway. They'll follow in the footsteps of their miserable parents, or bruises won't be born oranges." Shelley had tears in her eyes. Is that how they treat them? No. She'd known before that the orphanage's residents weren't particularly favored. But it was one thing to assume, but it was another to hear herself say it. The worst part was, Shelley knew the teacher was right. That's just the way it is. Probably having overheard that conversation, Shelley realized it's not worth dreaming about happiness, about a bright future. Nothing good was going to happen to her, and she shouldn't even try. Shelley went to college to become a pastry chef. She studied, knowing full well that she was unlikely to find a place in her specialty. It was too narrow a specialty, and she wasn't very good at it. Her hands did not obey well and could not repeat the operations that the teachers showed her. Shelley realized at the beginning that this was not her path, but all the orphans, their girls, were sent to learn to be pastry chefs. So she was sent. "It's okay," the group's supervisor, an unexpectedly warm-hearted, caring woman, reassured her. She somehow immediately took to Shelley, took pity on her, which was quite unusual. Not many people work in the profession. "You'll find yourself in life now. Girl, don't worry." Having reached adulthood, Shelley graduated from the orphanage. It was a day she greeted with joy. Deliverance at last. A confusing adult life lay ahead. Now she'd have to make her own way. No one is responsible for her now. But at least the end of bullying peers and cruel punishments of educators. Shelley was given an apartment on the outskirts of town by the state. It's an old, 3-story house. Creaky floors, piles of garbage. The room was tiny, but it was her own place. An island of tranquility where Shelley found herself a full-fledged mistress. At first, the girl was even dizzy. She could do whatever she wanted, cook something delicious in her own kitchen, lie in bed and read without fear that someone would take her book away from her. Watch late into the night on a hand-bought TV, an old, cracked screen. So what? It works. For the first time, Shelley lived on the money that had accumulated in her account during her stay in the orphanage. Each pupil received a certain amount of money, but the graduates were warned that they had to find a job before the savings ran out. Shelley knew it was really important. She'd seen how fast the money was being spent, especially since at first she was inexperienced and didn't know how to save money. Then she learned how to save money. As Shelley expected, she couldn't get a job as a pastry chef, and it wasn't her profession. The girl understood everything about herself and evaluated her skills quite adequately. Fortunately, there were many other options. Shelley tried to work as a cashier in a supermarket, but it didn't work out. It required quickness, somewhere assertiveness, boldness, somewhere even the skill of a psychologist. Shelley couldn't count money fast enough, she couldn't serve customers quickly, and everyone was always dissatisfied with her. And at the end of the shift, Shelley had a shortage, which was deducted, of course, from her salary. As a result, the girl received pennies, which were not even enough for food. It was good that her orphan savings had not been completely used up yet, and one day Shelley owed her master a month's wages. The salary wasn't enough to cover the shortfall, so Shelley quit her job to stay out of trouble. There's no telling what kind of shortage she'll get next time. Shelley started looking for work again. Now her situation was desperate. She had no money at all. Luckily, her neighbor Olivia helped. She told her that the utility company was looking for janitors. Shelley, without hesitation, grabbed the offer. About the work of a janitor, the girl at that time had the vaguest ideas. Already in the course of business, Shelley realized that this work is to her liking. It's nice to spend time in the fresh air. It's nice to communicate with the residents of the house. It's nice to make the territory cleaner. It's nice to hear the words of gratitude for the timely removal of dry leaves and sanded, slippery paths. Fate prepared another surprise. It brought Henry together. Young people who were all alone in the world suddenly found each other, and it was happiness for both of them. Henry and Shelley didn't meet for long. A couple of months after they met, they had already formalized their relationship and started living together in a small apartment. Shelley was happy to have Henry's hand as a man, and the house became even cozier and more comfortable. The young husband had split the ceilings, painted the walls, fixed a long leaking faucet, even replaced the wiring. He loved fixing up their dwelling. Shelley took care of Henry, cooked him delicious lunches and dinners, ironed his shirts, and most importantly, was interested in how his day was going. Perhaps that was the most enjoyable part. Both Shelley and Henry felt important, needed, loved. Now they were not alone on the entire planet. Life took on a whole new color. And then a wonderful thing happened. Shelley told her husband that she was expecting a child. The couple didn't seem to be planning an heir so soon, but the news made them both happy, of course, and it was scary how they would cope with the baby. They do not have anyone who would help, who would prompt, and whether they have enough money for such a luxury. And yet joyful emotions clearly prevailed in the range of stormy feelings of the future parents. Henry took a risky step. He quit his job at the housing and utilities company, which paid pennies, and got a job as a lawyer for a private lawyer. The latter offered him a much more respectable salary, but also more work. He had to study a lot, to understand the nuances of complicated cases, to sit in the office late into the night. Henry did it so that Shelley could quit her job. He rightly believed that the physical labor of janitorial work could be bad for the pregnancy. The man's salary was now quite high, but he was a private citizen. His business had its ups and downs and was sometimes jeopardized. Still, Henry didn't regret his decision. Shelley settled down at home and took over the household. Both spouses looked forward to the arrival of the baby. And then he was born small, warm, shrieking from the first days, looking remarkably like his father, the same green eyes and red hair. Shelley and Henry melted into the care of the baby. The boy was named Louis. Shelley had decided that. It was the name of one of her favorite book characters. Henry didn't mind Louis, a wonderful name. It turned out that a baby was really quite expensive. Diapers, special food, clothes that the baby grew out of lightning fast. Not to mention medicines, strollers, cribs, toys. Henry was getting by. He worked hard just so his family wouldn't need anything. They had food, they had necessities. They paid their rent. Of course, the young family couldn't afford anything extra. Trips to the sea, dinners in restaurants, expensive gadgets, all this was still inaccessible. But the spouses were not discouraged. It seemed to both of them that everything was still ahead of them. Shelley was busy with the baby in the house. Henry was working, and all would have been well, except that with Louis' arrival, Shelley's cramped apartment had become a mess. Not only did the number of tenants increase, but also the amount of stuff. Soon the couple realized they needed to expand. Louis was growing up. He needed more and more space, ideally his own room. A studio apartment would do, but then at least it would be newer and more spacious. And the family didn't particularly like the neighborhood. School and kindergarten were far away. The nearest bus stop was also about a 15-minute walk away. That's okay in the summer, but in the winter, it's a long walk. So Henry and Shelley thought about it and decided they needed a mortgage. The money for the down payment could be obtained from the sale of Shelley's cramped old apartment and Henry's country house, inherited from his mother. Of course, it was a risky endeavor, losing the whole place and going into debt all at once. But Henry had a good salary at the time. Louis was getting older, and the time was approaching when Shelley would be able to go to work. The payment seemed manageable to the couple. And so it began. At first, everything was going just fine. They found buyers quickly, even for the farmhouse, although Henry sensed big problems with it. The proceeds went partly toward the down payment on the mortgage, partly toward renovations. Shelley and Henry took a spacious one-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood, bright, clean, and no one had ever lived in it before. The renovation was done quickly. They had the money. They furnished the rooms with inexpensive but fresh and modern furniture. They hung beautiful curtains and decorated the walls with framed photographs. The pictures were of Shelley, Henry, and little Louis. Henry liked to remember the first New Year's Eve in the new place. They had just finished remodeling. The room still had that distinctive smell of glue and new furniture straight from the store. Beautiful, clean, cozy. A huge, almost ceiling-high Christmas tree occupied the corner of the living room near the window. Little Louis, in his funny pajamas, stared mesmerized at the flashing lights of the garlands that decorated the fluffy beauty. The overhead lights went out. The garlands and the flickering TV screen created a cozy, almost fairy tale atmosphere. Henry looked at his wife and son sitting on the couch and at the neatly set table with incredibly tasty dishes: potatoes and chicken, salads, fruit, and of course champagne. What's New Year's Eve without champagne? At that moment, Henry felt happy and peaceful. His favorite relatives were nearby. It seemed that things would only get better from now on. Henry was pleased with himself. He had done it all. He had succeeded. What he had never dreamed of had come true. On that magical, calm evening, the couple had no idea what trials fate was already preparing for them. It all began the very next year. Louise grew up to kindergarten. The baby got used to preschool surprisingly easily. No caprices and tantrums, no endless illnesses, which frightened young parents of acquaintances. Everything went smoothly. Shelley went to work. She was lucky she was hired as a kitchen assistant in a restaurant. The work was not particularly hard and responsible, and the salary was much higher than that of a janitor. The mortgage payment was a big part of the family's expenses, so the extra money came in handy. Then, in the fall, misfortunes fell upon Shelley and Henry one after another. The blossoming young woman suddenly began to weaken. Dizziness, nausea, loss of appetite. At first, Alan and Shelley assumed pregnancy. Both were afraid they were not yet ready for a second child, primarily financially. The couple realized they couldn't afford it, but there was no question of getting rid of the baby. In general, they gathered their courage and went to the doctor. In the women's counseling, couple was shocked no pregnancy, but Shelley's tests turned out to be alarming. The woman was strongly recommended to be examined by a therapist. Shelley, of course, made an appointment. The examinations took up a lot of her time and energy. She had to constantly take time off from work, which of course did not please her boss. During this period, his wife's eyes were guilty, anxious, and confused. Henry's heart shrank with pity when he looked at his wife. But the man still believed that everything would be all right. A vitamin deficiency or a malfunctioning organ? No problem, they would find the cause, treat it, and everything would be as before. The diagnosis sounded like a thunderclap: the rarest blood disease, presumably hereditary. Shelley couldn't check. The doctors guessed she didn't know anything about her relatives. And what did it matter where the disease came from? The main thing was that the treatment was long, expensive, and there was no guarantee. Doctors with ruthless truthfulness immediately outlined the most likely scenario. Most likely the disease, despite treatment, will progress. All medical manipulations can only briefly delay the inevitable. Shelley was quite resistant to her diagnosis, or maybe she was just pretending to be, braving it for the sake of her husband and son. Henry, on the other hand, felt like he'd been hit over the head with a sandbag. For a long time he felt stunned, completely disoriented. How could it be? Where had the trouble come from all of a sudden? After all, they had just made it out, just started a new life. They had so many plans, so many wonderful ideas. Then Henry came to his senses, accepted the situation, and began to act. First of all, Henry began to look for doctors who had experience in treating patients like his wife. It wasn't cheap, to put it mildly. He had to sell a few things, take out some loans. And then there was the mortgage. Henry was working alone again. Shelley was weakened, and the treatment was taking up most of her time. Louis was happy, not sick, well-behaved, more and more conscious and independent. He understood that Mom was sick, Dad had to work a lot, and learned to serve himself to dress, cook breakfast, make sandwiches. The little boy grew up before his eyes. People around him praised Louis, setting him as an example to their children. Henry wished all this had never happened. He wished his son didn't know how to tie his shoelaces or make an omelet like other kids his age. Shelley wasn't helped by the medical treatment they could afford. The family went into debt, but it was all for nothing. The young woman was fading, a pale shadow of herself. Henry pounded the thresholds of charitable foundations, tried to get the advice of eminent professors. The latter sometimes succeeded. Only these luminaries of medicine divorced their hands. Shelley's disease was poorly understood, unpredictable. No one knew how to help the young woman. Conventional treatments had little effect on her. Eventually, Shelley was admitted to an inpatient hospital. At that point, she had been sick for about 3 years. The woman couldn't even eat anymore, she was so weak. Henry prepared for a long struggle, even found a nurse who would take care of his wife more carefully for a fee. It didn't work. Shelley didn't live 24 hours after she was admitted to the hospital. Henry couldn't believe what had happened. He was once again experiencing a terrible, unfair loss. The situation was made worse by the fact that the man was now responsible for more than just himself. He had a son. And Louis somehow had to explain that his mother was gone. And then another blow, Henry lost his job. The law firm where he'd worked for the last few years went bankrupt. The owner of the company was always on the edge, taking risks for big profits. So he miscalculated one day. So Henry was also out of a job. After all, during Shelley's illness, the family had accumulated a lot of debts, and the mortgage payment was a heavy burden. Henry found a new job. It paid much less, but there was no other way out. It's not easy to get a good job. That time Henry was lucky to find a high-paying job, or unlucky because his earnings were so unstable. The man worked in the office during the day, and in the evenings he worked part-time. He would help unload a truck at the store, or take part in repairs. Louis was left to his own devices all this time. He did not complain. The boy could always occupy himself. Louis liked to draw. He would take pencils or paints, a sheet of paper, and as if he was disconnected from reality. He went away from the gray reality and created whole worlds with bright rainbows, dense forests, and cute creatures with big eyes, the kind you don't meet in real life. Henry didn't worry about his son going hungry. The main thing was to have something in the refrigerator: bread, sausage, eggs, milk, frozen dumplings. Louis was fine with lunch and dinner. He also fed his father, who was tired after work. That's how they lived. Until it turned out that the apartment was going to the bank for debt. At that time, there were overdue mortgages and loans, so they asked the man and his child to vacate the premises. Henry, as a lawyer, tried to fight for his property. He filed for bankruptcy, tried to explain his plight to people. To no avail. In the end, to avoid the attention of the child welfare authorities, he had to accept it. That's how Henry and Louis ended up at the hostel. James immediately made friends with them. He liked the honest, hard-working Henry. He liked Louis, who was so serious and mature for his 6 years. The three of them became buddies, or even friends, and often had dinner together. James occasionally took Louis for walks. Henry worked a lot, and sitting in a dark hostel was boring for the child. So James took Louis for walks. They talked about everything in the world, discussed different situations, told each other something about themselves. James learned that Louis really wants to become an artist. But the little boy realized that to do that, he had to study. Also, Louis knew that his father did not have money and time to take him to circles or to art school. And that made Louis sad. But the kid did not lose heart, thinking that he would go to the first grade, and there would probably be free classes for students. School was just around the corner, less than a year away. If Louis was looking forward to the start of school with joyful anticipation, his father feared the moment. Because then his and Louis' small homeless family was guaranteed to be on the radar of the child welfare authorities. A child should have a home, a workplace, a bed. And little Louis is living in a hostel. Basically, he's wandering around with his homeless father. Of course, no one's going to leave the boy with a loser parent. They'll take him to an orphanage. Henry knew all too well what it was like there. Shelley had told him enough for the man to try his best to avoid the same scenario for his own child. Except he didn't have the strength, and there was no help. Henry was willing to work, to toil at several jobs, which he actually did. But all these efforts did not bring the desired result. It was still a long way from buying his own place. Henry had some savings, but not enough for even a fraction of the down payment. In short, the situation was desperate. James cringed at the icy wind, or at the sudden rush of thoughts, memories. It wasn't a gentle fall, more like winter. The snow would fall, it would become brighter, more beautiful, softer. Little Louise was looking forward to the new year, to receive presents, to sit at the festive table, to make a wish. He's an adult now. Louise is independent. But still a child, still quite a boy, sincerely believed that the wish made under the chimes would come true. And James knew perfectly well what he would ask Santa Claus or someone else for. In fact, he knew exactly what little Louise was wishing for. The boy would ask for an apartment for him and his dad, and an art school for himself. It's just a shame none of those things will come true anytime soon. James is going to get Louis something he'll love. Already picked up a young artist's kit at the store. Expensive, of course, but nothing's too good for Louis. A suitcase, an easel with a set of paints, pencils, and felt-tip pens. The anticipation of Louis's eyes lighting up at the sight of this splendor made James feel warm. It was so nice to please the people around him, and the children twice as much. But this miracle suitcase would not solve the problems of the little boy and his father, only partially brighten up the gray everyday life of the child. At least that's it. James finally climbed from the bridge to the embankment. Now he was walking along the parapet, in a hurry to get to work. There was no way he could be late. Henry valued him, among other things, for his diligence and reliability. He didn't want to let the man down. And then James noticed that people were standing by the lantern. Men and women, teenagers, children. They were talking excitedly, some were making phone calls, some were filming something on their phones. James followed the gazes of these people. He was stunned. He had never expected to see such a thing. In the dark waves of the wide river, 50 meters from the shore, there was something, or rather, someone. A human head emerged from under the water and then disappeared again. This someone was drowning. He had no strength left. There was no time to speculate about how the man had gotten into the river at a time like this. James, not giving himself time to think over the desperate act, had already swung over the parapet. The man sped across the strip of beach, sand packed into his sneakers, rolled up his pants. The man ran to the water's edge, threw off his jacket, sweater, shoes. It's all heavier. In the cold waves of the river, it would be extra ballast. James was an excellent swimmer. The river was very close to his village. As a child, he used to spend days there with the local boys, swimming and diving and just splashing and frolicking. James, at 5 or 6 years old, felt like a fish in water. Such a pun. But of course, the man never went into the river in this weather. Cold wind and a strong current. And he'd never rescued a drowning man before. But James realized that if he didn't try to pull this man out, no one would help him. And then how to live with it. He had to at least try. The man very well imagined now the despair of a drowning man. There are so many people around, but they are all just watching. Someone's calling the rescue team. Will they make it in time? It's a matter of seconds. The icy water burned his feet. James shivered, but stepped forward. He knew it would be cold at first, and then his body would adapt. And so it did. And now the man is already approaching the drowning man with powerful rows. It is hard to swim strong current, wind, and there is a lot of garbage in the water. Some branches, snags, tina, elderly fangs of algae. James had less and less strength, but he could see his goal. A head of dark hair, he was close enough to get a good look at the person. It appeared to be a young girl, or even a child. Pale face, eyes black with despair and horror. The drowning woman was struggling for life with her last strength. She must have been a good swimmer, or she would have gone under long ago. But in any case, if James didn't hurry, she would. Finally, the man was close by. He swam up behind the girl. A needed knowledge rose from somewhere from the depths of memory. Drowning people in a desperate attempt to survive are even capable of drowning their saviors. That's why James kept his distance. Good thing the girl had long hair. James grabbed hold of it and swam to the shore. The girl felt help coming. At first, she wanted to reach for James to claw at him, but he wouldn't let go. Then the girl sort of realized what was happening, even relaxed a little and let herself be pulled out. Yeah, she wasn't going to be able to handle the current alone. The girl seemed very thin, almost transparent. Already on the shore, silently looking into the face of her rescuer, the poor girl lost consciousness. Here they were already waiting. Someone wrapped James in a plaid. Someone else covered the girl. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance. The man looked around and realized everything was going to be okay now. Only then his hands trembled, and for some reason his teeth chattered. Whether it was the cold or the fear, James had almost lost the girl, and he might not have made it out at this water temperature. The focus of everyone's attention shifted to the girl. The doctors arrived, and from somewhere came an anxious tall man dressed in an expensive leather jacket. It seemed to be the girl's father. At least they both had the same hazel-colored eyes, dark blonde hair, large nose, and defined cheekbones. James didn't wait for the story to unfold. He dressed quickly and hurried to Henry's office. Surely the boss would accept his tardiness when James told him the reason. But Henry was late that day, so he didn't even have to explain himself. James was hurrying to the store to buy milk, and the next morning, when a man called out to him, he turned around slowly and met his gaze with the familiar hazel eyes. In front of him was a man in a stylish leather jacket. The girl's father, who had somehow ended up in the water that day. "I finally found you," the man smiled, holding out his hand to James. "It wasn't easy. My name is Bob. I'm the father of the teenager you rescued." "Hello," James muttered. He knew the man wanted to thank him. James was anxious to know what had happened to the girl, what her condition was now, how she had gotten into the water. All these days the man thought a lot about the rescued girl. "I wanted to believe that she was okay." Thanks to social media, the man continued. One of the people who were on the embankment at the time posted a video. "This video clearly shows you saving my Tara. A brave thing to do. Desperate. There aren't many people like you these days. And how lucky you were there when you did." "How's the girl?" James asked. "Thera's fine. She's in rehab right now," Bob said. "So she's physically hurt?" "Not really. Just a little cold. That's the other thing. Do you know how she ended up in the river? Did you see that moment?" James shook his head no. All because of unrequited love. She fell in love with some boy, and he started dating someone else. Tara got herself worked up, that's all. She's in counseling now. She's under observation, and she's on the mend. In fact, as it turns out, she realized right away what a stupid thing she'd done. Right after she got in the icy water. It was too late if it hadn't been for you. "The important thing is that everything's okay now," James smiled. "That's true. Her impulse was accidental. I think this situation taught your girl a lot. It taught me a lot," Bob admitted. "For years in business, I thought there were no good, selfless people who would do what you do. I became cynical, cold, callous. Your act taught me a lot and made me rethink all my values. I've changed a lot." James nodded. "What can I say? I want to thank you. I have opportunities. I know you live in a hostel. You don't have your own place. Ask for anything you want, anything at all. People like you deserve a better fate." James thought for a moment. He remembered Henry's worried eyes when he received his notice from the guardianship authorities, and he remembered little Louis talking excitedly about his dream of becoming an artist. "My life suits me just fine," James said at last. "But there is one person, a little person, who could use your help." He smiled and spread his arms out to catch the boy, hugging him as he liked. "I won first place in the town drawing contest with my drawing of space. Remember I showed it to you?" "Of course I remember." "I told you this would happen," Henry answered. They agreed to go for a walk in the park that Sunday afternoon. Louis liked to run along the paved paths, feed the ducks in the pond, and watch the funny girls. And James and Henry liked to sit at the local cafe, where they cooked flavorful, melt-in-your-mouth kebabs. A little over a year had passed since that conversation with Bob. The wealthy businessman had been amazed at James's request. After all, he had not asked for himself but wanted to help his friend with a small child, two people in desperate straits. Bob bought Henry a one-room apartment, but in a new building in a good neighborhood, near the gymnasium and, importantly, the art school. Henry enrolled Louis in it at the first opportunity. From then on, the boy's talent developed rapidly. His drawings became more and more professional and correct, but at the same time did not lose their uniqueness and spontaneity. Of course, Bob could not help but do something for James personally, although he did not ask him to do so. First, the businessman bought an apartment next to Henry and Louis. They became neighbors, not hostile tenants. Secondly, Bob gave his daughter's savior a high-paying job as a gardener. James had always enjoyed tinkering in the ground, tending to the plants. This was where he belonged. Tara, Bob's daughter, shunned the new gardener for some reason. She was probably afraid of the memories of him. But then they became friends. The girl, as it turned out, regretted her action and now, after a while, could not explain even to herself how she had dared to do such a thing. Sometimes James looked at the tall, thin, touching Thera, and his heart sank at the thought of what would have happened if he hadn't pulled her out of the water. Henry and James walked slowly down the parkway. Ahead of them on his scooter rolled a happy Louis. "Oh, there you are. I thought you were waiting for me at the fountain." James turned around, smiled, and hurried toward Olivia, a short woman with piercing blue eyes. They had only met recently, but it was already clear that they were serious. Today they'd agreed to go out for a fun, boisterous group of people. It was going to be a wonderful day.